Committee will come to order, and we continue nominations week here in the Senate Finance Committee. And today we will be welcoming Katherine, President Biden's nominee to serve as the United States Trade Representative. I want to begin this way. America's trade policy needs to be smarter and stronger. 4 more years of mean tweets and chaos from the White House won't cut it when our country is calling for more high-skill, high-wage jobs. Fortunately, chaos is not President Biden's style. A smarter, stronger trade policy requires a savvy leader at the U.S. Trade Representative who understands what working Americans are actually going through and knows how to develop a path for them to get ahead. That is precisely what Katherine will bring to this job. Ms. has a wealth of experience working on trade policy from just about every angle. She's got leadership experience fighting back against China's trade cheating. She was at the forefront of efforts to improve the new NAFTA when the previous administration handed the Congress a deal that wasn't good enough for American jobs. She's got a proven track record of achieving wins for workers and businesses, for the environment, for ranchers, farmers, and innovators. And as colleagues know, and I saw everyone visiting before we started, she is no stranger to us at the Finance Committee. We work very closely with her, the Ways and Means Committee, and at USTR prior to that. So we're going to have a lot to do in the months ahead. In my view, it starts with developing a tougher, new approach to China. To the extent that the previous administration ever had a strategy beyond the ex-president's gut impulses, it just didn't get the job done. The China market is now more closed off to American goods and services today than it was 4 years ago. There hasn't been any real change to the trade ripoffs that wiped out so many American jobs and stole so many innovative ideas over the decades. I am confident that President Biden and Ms. will do better. The committee is also going to put a special focus on ending the import of goods produced with forced labor. It's enough that forced labor is morally repugnant. It's also true that when American workers have to compete with slave labor, everybody loses. It's a race to absolute rock bottom for workers' wages. Next, the United States needs a full blockade against other countries' discriminatory policies aimed at knifing our industries with taxes where America leads, such as digital goods and services. Trade in stolen timber and other natural resources that damage the environment and edge out hardworking Americans in the forestry sector have to be stopped. There's a lot of work to be done when it comes to implementing the new NAFTA. Ms. knows firsthand that the new NAFTA raised the bar for labor standards, environmental rules, and digital trade. But the agreement only delivers for American workers and businesses if it's implemented and enforced the right way. We want to work with the USTR on that process. Bottom line, getting trade done right is heavy lifting. It's not just about angry tweets and flimsy trade deals that produce more headlines than good-paying jobs. Trade done right is about strong enforcement that protects American workers and businesses and creates new opportunities to raise wages and increase our exports. It raises the bar for labor and environmental standards and digital rules around the world so the global economy competes on our terms. U.S. Trade Representative leads the effort, but it also involves other agencies, Customs and Border Protection, as well as the Departments of Commerce and Agriculture, State, the Treasury, and others. And it requires strong and steady relationships with our international economic allies. None of that came easily to the last administration. In my view, the chaos that came out of the White House over the last 4 years cost a lot of opportunities to help our workers actually get ahead. So I'm glad that President Biden is already taking a different tack, and in my view, he made a superb choice for U.S. Trade Representative. I trust Ms. Tai's judgment We know the depth of her experience. She's the daughter of immigrants to the United States. As a first-generation immigrant myself, I know how much it means to give back to the country that welcomed in our families. And rounding out a week of historic firsts here in this hearing room, she would be the first woman of color to serve as U.S. Trade Representative. She's got a lot of fans on both sides of the committee. I'm pleased to be able to support her nomination. I thank her for coming today, and I look forward to questions, and let's hear from our ranking member, Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Tai, welcome to you, and congratulations on your nomination. The U.S. Trade Representative is a very important position where today's decisions will be felt for years to come. A successful trade policy means more high-paying jobs. We need these jobs more than ever if we are to emerge from this pandemic stronger than before. I know the importance of free trade very well. Idaho exports over $4 billion in goods annually, including $1.7 billion in computer and electronic goods. Remarkably, 85% of Idaho's exporters are businesses that employ fewer than 500 people. We cannot forget that. Free trade does not just strengthen the powerful, it empowers all Americans, including those running and working in smaller businesses. It does so for a simple reason. We sell high-quality goods and services that people around the world want. We do not need to be intimidated by foreign competitors. Our market is already one of the most open in the world. Our problem is not about whether to open our market further. It is, in fact, that too many foreign markets remain closed to us. History demonstrates repeatedly that Americans do very well in foreign markets if only given the chance to participate in an environment of fair trade. For example, bringing down just some of Japan's agricultural barriers in the U.S.-Japanese Phase 1 deal increased Idaho's agricultural exports by over a third. The importance of fair trade and the price of it being denied is also well understood by the people of Idaho. Idaho is the home of Micron Technology, a global leader in semiconductors and the technology of the semiconductor industry. Chinese state-owned companies stole Micron's trade secrets in order to secure an unfair advantage. China's systemic theft of American innovation has been estimated to cost the United States nearly $500 billion each year. Idaho's softwood lumber producers face an uneven playing field against subsidized Canadian exports. We cannot let the 750,000 jobs in the lumber industry or the 420 million acres of family-owned timberlands be threatened by unfair subsidies. Idaho's world-famous potatoes cannot be shipped more than 16 miles south of the Mexican border because of protectionism disguised as a safety measure. Potato farms, including Cranny Farms in Oakley, Idaho, gave away millions of potatoes last year because domestic customers dried up as a result of the pandemic. Put plainly, the United States does not just lose potential opportunities when its leaders fail to engage appropriately on trade. Our businesses and workers lose ground here at home, in every state. This is why the U.S. needs an effective USTR to tear down trade barriers and confront abusive trade practices. President Biden has nominated someone with extensive trade policy experience, including experience litigating major trade disputes against China. I look forward to hearing more from you, Ms. Tai, regarding how you would use your experience to engage the numerous challenges facing the United States, if confirmed as our U.S. Trade Representative. Your experience, no matter how extensive, will go to waste if the Biden administration's approach to trade policy ends up being a timeout, as some officials have already suggested. In particular, I'm referencing statements by administration officials who have asserted that the president will not sign any new trade agreements until he sees his domestic priorities achieved, including strengthening Buy American requirements in government purchasing. Ms. Tai, you must make the president understand that trade is a domestic priority for hundreds of millions of Americans. I'm happy to discuss buying American. However, our businesses and workers are ready to sell American to all foreign customers right now. While often said, it is worth repeating, most of the world's customers are outside of the U.S. borders. Americans deserve to sell their products and need access to that huge foreign marketplace. Our businesses need that access more than ever because other countries are not standing still. The United Kingdom is the fifth largest economy in the world, and the UK is taking advantage of its newfound freedom from EU restrictions to aggressively negotiate its own new trade deals. Our special political relationship with the UK must now be complemented with a special economic relationship that will increase employment and output on both sides of the Atlantic. It's not just our allies that are moving forward. Other countries are taking steps that may push us back even further if the United States is seen as standing still and not negotiating trade deals. Notably, China is moving forward with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. It is arguably the largest free trade agreement in the world. Yet the RCEP has weak rules on intellectual property and protecting foreign investment. And the RCEP has no rules whatsoever on state-owned enterprises, labor rights, or environmental protections. If the Biden administration wants a worker-centered trade policy, as it claims it does, then our USTR should ensure that the international trading regime strongly reflects American values rather than those of China. In short, the need for an energetic and effective trade policy is more compelling than ever. I expect Ms. Tai will well demonstrate in today's hearing that she has the requisite skill set to deliver as much. But the question is whether she will have the President's support to do so. I hope for America's sake that she will. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing today, and I look forward to hearing from you, Ms. Tai.
I thank my colleague, and we have some guests from the House, distinguished guests, Chairman Richie Neal and his ranking member, Kevin Brady. Let's allow them to make an introduction. Chairman Neal.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden and Ranking Member Crapo and members of the committee. It's certainly an honor and delight to be here with my friend, the Ranking Member of the committee, Mr. Brady. It's not every day that one has the opportunity in these institutions to introduce a key member of your staff at their confirmation hearing for the top job in their field, or as we frequently refer to the Ways and Means Committee, as family. In nominating Katherine Tai to be the United States Trade Representative, President Biden selected a knowledgeable, tenacious trade expert that will use her perch to better the lives of the American people. As noted, first woman of color and the first Asian American, her nomination is indeed historic. But what is still to come will be how we define the history of this moment, and we will ultimately, I know, remember Katherine for the great work that she will do. I was struck by her own reflection of the work that has guided us through trade questions during these past years, but always guided by the promise of extending the same hope and opportunity that this country extended to her and her family many years ago. I'm glad that Chairman Wyden mentioned the immigrant experience because I share it as well with grandparents. Inspired by the example of her parents, who I learned this morning, her mom has a degree from the University of Massachusetts. Katherine is a second-generation public servant. She began her trade career at USTR back in 2007 as Associate General Counsel. Later, she served as Chief Counsel for China Trade Enforcement, where she represented our interests before the World Trade Organization. It was from there that the Ways and Means Committee had the good fortune of having Katherine join our team. Her time has been filled with many accomplishments, but none greater than the pivotal role that she played behind the scenes in our successful work to improve the largest trade agreement in American history, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which secured widespread support in terms of passage. A reminder this morning, 195 Democrats voted for USMCA and 194 Republicans voted for USMCA. While I talk about it often, it has not received the sort of attention that this feat accomplished, or the credit that it was deserved. Katherine was very much a part of crafting the agreement that drew support far and wide across the political spectrum and even more importantly, in our caucus. A skilled negotiator, she was able to include tough labor and environmental standards in USMCA that will now allow us to uphold strong moral leadership in future deals. Most importantly, there is one issue that all of us in this room agree upon: enforcement of these trade agreements. It's her understated grit and outstanding character that have distinguished her, and why her nomination has drawn support from Democrats and Republicans, as well as leaders from labor, business, and the environmental communities. Having worked with Katherine for many years, I can say without hesitancy that no one is better prepared to represent the United States in the global trade arena as we recover from the pandemic and reestablish our dominance on the world stage. And given the trade policy and its understanding of the requirement for close collaboration between Congress and the administration, Katherine is uniquely situated to succeed. Looking ahead to reinvigorating our economy, Katherine will use sound domestic and international trade policy to better develop our workforce and level the playing field for hard-working Americans. As the United States seeks to repair strained relationships with our partners around the world and address increasingly perilous challenges from China, Katherine will be an honorable and effective representative for our nation, our people, and our interests. She's a trailblazer, and without doubt, the best choice to fill this critical position. I would urge all of you to support her nomination, and while I'm going to miss her counsel, it will truly be an honor to continue working with Katherine Tai, the United States Trade Representative, and I look forward to calling her Madam Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for an excellent statement, Mr. Chairman, and we will underline in the record that you consider her to be a trailblazer. That is a very important thing. Mr. Brady, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Wyden, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the Senate or the Finance Committee. It is a great pleasure to be here to introduce Katherine Tai on her nomination as U.S. Trade Representative. It's a particular pleasure for two reasons. The first is that I can join with my friend and colleague, Chairman Neal, in a bipartisan show of support for Ambassador-designate Tai's nomination. And the second is that Ambassador-designate Tai is such a qualified nominee with a well-earned reputation as a knowledgeable and skillful trade lawyer, negotiator, and consensus builder. Her credentials are impeccable, with extensive experience at USTR, as the chairman mentioned, and particularly as a distinguished alum of our Ways and Means Committee family. She understands how the Hill works. As members of Congress, we're assured that she knows Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution backwards and forwards. She knows firsthand that trade policy is successful for American workers and for job creation only when there is a true partnership between the executive branch and us in Congress about the goals and execution of trade policy. She understands that the core of that partnership is transparency and thorough consultation with members of Congress and their staffs. I'm confident she'll work with us to develop a bipartisan consensus on trade policy before taking action. Her invaluable work on USMCA, as the chairman said, certainly showed her commitment to taking all views into account. I will encourage her to use that spirit of consensus so that we can together determine appropriate partners and goals for strong, enforceable trade agreements and finish trade negotiations with U.S., Kenya, and Japan, as well as to take our trade agreement with China to the next level. And I also look forward to working with her to extend trade promotion authority, to recognize and formalize our partnership and goals. In this way, we can negotiate trade agreements that prioritize Americans and our workers. I am certain that Ambassador-designate Tai will take her enforcement mission very seriously. She knows firsthand trade agreements are worthwhile only if they're both enforceable and enforced. I take particular pride in having worked across the aisle with Chairman Neal and Ambassador-designate Tai to make sure that USMCA contains an enforcement mechanism that's greatly improved from NAFTA. Our enforcement mechanisms built into our trade agreements give her the tools she needs to hold our trading partners to account. I know she will insist that countries abide by their obligations, whether it's making sure China complies with its obligations under the Phase 1 agreement, addressing blatant revenue grabs by various trading partners through the use of digital services taxes, or challenging Mexican and Canadian practices that violate USMCA, I'm confident she'll not only be watching, but acting. Ambassador-designate Tai also understands the importance of the WTO, as well as the need to reform its institutions in a constructive way. And I hope she'll work with us to take care of unfinished business by renewing GSP and MTB as soon as possible. Senators, it is an honor to be here. For all of these reasons, I am delighted to support the nomination of Katherine Tai, part of our Ways and Means family, to be our next U.S. Trade Representative. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you very much for coming, and in a challenging political climate, sends a very powerful message that you and the chairman are here together on behalf of Ms. Tai, and we thank you both. I know you have busy schedules, so we'll excuse you at any point, and thank you again for being here. Now, Ms. Tai, normally we have your opening statement, but our intelligence sources say that you may have some family in the house, and if that's the case, we'd like it if you'd introduce them.
Thank you very much, Senator Wyden, Chairman Wyden. Today I have with me my mother, Betty Tai, and my husband, Robert Skidmore. I wanted to thank them for their support and their many sacrifices without which I would not be here today. So thank you very much for acknowledging that.
We're glad you're here, and you're at social distancing with your loved ones, so we thank you both. Okay, Ms. Tai, now it's time for your opener. Then we'll have questions, and again, we're just thrilled that the President selected you, and look forward to seeing you confirmed and confirmed quickly. You got a lot of heavy lifting to do. Let's have your opener.
Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Crapo, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. And I want to thank my family for being here as well. The chance to serve the American people, fight on their behalf, and represent them on the world stage once again will be the greatest honor of my life. I thank President Biden for providing me with this opportunity. Serving as the U.S. Trade Representative holds special resonance for me as the daughter of immigrants. My parents were born in mainland China and grew up in Taiwan. The immigration reforms set in motion by President Kennedy opened path for them to come here as graduate students in the sciences, and they made the most of their American opportunity. At Walter Reed, my dad helped the Army research treatments for illnesses that debilitated GIs during the Vietnam War, the war in which my father-in-law fought bravely as a young man. My mom still works at the National Institutes of Health. She heads a clinical trials network developing treatments for opioid addiction that will help to stem an epidemic causing so much suffering in our communities. I am proud of their service to the nation that welcomed them. And I am proud to live in a country where, in just one generation, their daughter could grow up to represent the United States and our interests around the world. That sense of pride and patriotism will ground me every day if I have the honor to be confirmed as United States Trade Representative. I know that the challenges ahead are significant. Our first task will be to help American communities emerge from the pandemic and economic crisis. USTR has an important role to play in that effort. Working with Congress, the entire Biden-Harris administration, and other countries and trusted partners, USTR will help to build out strong supply chains that will get our economy back on track. In the longer term, we must pursue trade policies that advance the interests of all Americans. Policies that recognize that people are workers and wage earners, not just consumers. Policies that promote broad, equitable growth here at home. Policies that support American innovation and enhance our competitive edge. That's why I will make it a priority to implement and enforce the renewed terms of our trade relationship with Canada and Mexico. Too often in the past, Congress and the administration came together to finalize and pass a trade agreement. But then other urgent matters arose, and we all moved on. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement is a uniquely bipartisan accomplishment that must break that trend. It represents an important step in reforming our approach to trade. We must all continue to prioritize its implementation and success. We must continue to pursue trade policies that are ambitious in achieving robust bipartisan support. I will also prioritize rebuilding our international alliances and partnerships and re-engaging with international institutions. We must do the hard work and secure the necessary reforms that allow the world to come together and address common threats like climate change, the COVID pandemic, and a global economic downturn. That duty of leadership extends, of course, to addressing the challenges posed by China. I previously served as America's chief enforcer against China's unfair trade practices. I know firsthand how critically important it is that we have a strategic and coherent plan for holding China accountable to its promises and effectively competing with its model of state-directed economics. I know the opportunities and the limitations in our existing toolbox, and I know how important it is to build what the President has termed a united front of U.S. allies. We must recommit to working relentlessly with others to promote and defend our shared values of freedom, democracy, truth, and opportunity in a just society. China is simultaneously a rival, a trade partner, and an outsized player whose cooperation we'll also need to address certain global challenges. We must remember how to walk, chew gum, and play chess at the same time. That means here at home, we must prioritize resilience and make the investments in our people and our infrastructure to harness our potential, boost our competitiveness, and build a more inclusive prosperity. We must also impart the values and rules that guide global commerce, and we must enforce those terms vigorously. Having spent my career fighting for American workers, I'm honored by the opportunity to work alongside the bright and dedicated public servants at USTR, with our partners and allies, and with each of you. Having served nearly 7 years in the House of Representatives, I know that U.S. trade policy is most successful when it is conducted through a healthy partnership between the administration and the Congress. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tai. We've got some obligatory questions that we have to ask before we get into members' questions. I think you're aware of that. First, is there anything that you're aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you've been nominated?
No.
Second, do you know of any reason, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you've been nominated?
No.
Do you agree without reservation to respond to any reasonable summons to appear and testify before a duly constituted committee of the Congress if you're confirmed?
Yes.
Finally, do you commit to provide a prompt response in writing to any questions addressed to you by any senator of this committee?
Yes.
Very good. Now, Senator Crapo and I will begin with our questions. We've got lots of members' interests, so colleagues, we're going to try and stick closely to the 5-minute rule. Ms. Tai, it seems to me we have to begin with the reality that America sacrificed 4 years of trade leverage, particularly stiffing allies who wanted to work with us on key questions, particularly China. So my first question to you is, how do you intend to work with our trading partners to direct a full court press against China, to force an end to their policies of stealing our intellectual property and forced transfer of technology to them?
Chairman Wyden, thank you for your question and for highlighting this important aspect of the trade policy that the United States needs to have going forward. I think with respect to working with others, I want to acknowledge right up front that working with others is hard work. And I think that hard work begins by engaging, reaching out, and having the conversations which will sometimes be quite difficult about how we can work together and how we can capitalize on our shared interests to make more effective policy together.
Now, with respect to the next major area, USMCA, the Trump administration proceeded while several outstanding issues were up in the air. To this day, Canada hasn't come into compliance on dairy requirements. Mexico lags on implementation of their labor laws. We wrote this law so that it would have real teeth. And I'm very pleased that we were able to get a brand new Brown-Wyden rapid response mechanism to address labor violations in Mexico and ensure that we would have the strongest labor standards ever in a U.S. trade agreement. Could you just kind of give us your top priorities going forward now when you hit the ground? We're going to get you confirmed. I'm convinced of it. What are going to be your top priorities for using these new tools to enforce USMCA?
Senator Wyden, I think the top priority for USMCA is to use those tools. The renegotiation of the NAFTA, I believe that all of you have been through that effort. It was hard. That was hard work. And the agreement that we have now has, as Ranking Member Brady referenced, has an improved overall enforcement mechanism, improved from the original NAFTA. And as you've referenced, Chairman Wyden, has new mechanisms on labor enforcement in particular that are novel, not just to this agreement, but to U.S. trade agreements across the board. The key to using the USMCA and making it successful is to exercise the tools that were so hard fought in being incorporated into the agreement.
Let me go next to this question of digital taxes, because we are seeing many countries around the world, in effect, deploying what I call a digital dagger. And it is right at the heart of American companies that pay high-skill, high-wage jobs, and it really just seems an effort to hold our companies back to advantage others. What tools and forums can you use at USTR to beat back this kind of digital protectionism wave that can do so much damage to our sector that really leads in these areas, and that's why countries are targeting them?
Chairman Wyden, I'm aware of the development and proliferation of digital services tax efforts by different countries around the world. I want to acknowledge that if confirmed, this will be an area that will require close coordination, not just between the administration and Congress, but the different parts of the administration, in particular USTR and the Treasury Department. I know that the Biden administration is committed to cooperative multilateral efforts at the OECD and the G20. And if confirmed, I will look forward to working with colleagues in the administration and with the senators on this committee, the members of the Ways and Means Committee and Congress overall to address the issue.
Let me close on the issue of tariffs. Under Section 232, the previous administration imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports that they said threatened to impair national security. The tariffs are still in place for most countries, including many of America's allies, and as a result, a number of our trading partners have imposed retaliatory tariffs on our exports. Recognizing that the Commerce Department administers this rather than USTR, you're also going to play an important role in tariff policy because it's part of the trade toolbox. In your view, what role should these tariffs play in a worker-focused trade policy?
Well, Senator Wyden, the tariffs, I want to acknowledge that you're absolutely right. The 232 program is within the authority of the Commerce Department. But if confirmed, I would hope very much to work closely as USTR with the Commerce Department and other parts of the administration on the landscape that we have before us. I also want to say that with respect to tariffs, that tariffs are a legitimate tool in the trade toolbox. It is because of tariffs that the Senate Finance Committee and the Ways and Means Committee have original jurisdiction over trade. And tariffs are a very important part of our fair trade remedies toolbox. Having said that, I think that with respect to the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum that you mentioned, we have to acknowledge that we have overall a very significant global marketplace problem in the steel and aluminum markets that are driven primarily by China's overcapacity that it's built in production of these materials. But it's not just a China problem. And what we are going to need in a worker-centered trade policy is an effective solution that looks at a whole slew of policy tools to address that larger problem.
Thank you. I'm over my time. Senator Crapo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, welcome, Ms. Tai. I want to follow up a little bit on some of the USMCA types of questions that Chairman Wyden already started addressing with you. With regard to its commitments under the USMCA, Mexico is taking a number of steps in the wrong direction. In agriculture, Mexico is maintaining or enacting new restrictions on the U.S. that lack any scientific justification, including potatoes, as I've already mentioned, biotech crops, and others. In the energy industry, Mexico appears to be discriminating against U.S. businesses to favor its state-owned oil and gas giant Pemex. If confirmed, how would you employ the tools available under the USMCA, including dispute settlement, to resolve such issues if we don't see progress on them in the next few months?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Crapo, for that question. I'm aware of some of the ongoing concerns with Mexico's implementation of the USMCA in these areas and in others. I think to echo my earlier comments, we have a full set of tools, a lot of them new in the USMCA, for engaging with Mexico and with Canada, for that matter, to address ongoing irritants and ongoing frictions. Again, if confirmed, I look forward to engaging with the stakeholders, with the really expert staff at USTR, and with all of you to beginning our engagement with the Mexican government on how to resolve our problems.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your focus on dispute resolution. The fixes and improvements that we made in the USMCA, I believe, were badly needed. I just want to focus again one more on that, this time with regard to Canada. An issue that's very important to us in the Pacific Northwest is softwood lumber. I'm deeply concerned about the impact of subsidized and dumped Canadian lumber imports on American businesses and jobs, and this is an issue, as you know, which we've been dealing with for years and years. And we've had tons of litigation. We're engaged in litigation now. Can you commit to me that if confirmed, you'll aggressively defend our trade remedy measures on Canadian lumber, including by allocating whatever resources are necessary to mount a successful defense in the litigation that is now underway?
Ranking Member Crapo, if confirmed, I commit to you to work closely with you and the senators and members for whom the lumber industry is very important on, as you noted, our longstanding issues in this area with Canada, and I hope to have that opportunity to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. America's innovative industries are second to none. From creative content to digital commerce to pharmaceutical research, America's innovators are what are getting us through the pandemic and what will get us out of it. We need to preserve our leadership in this field, and the April release of the USTR Special 301 report is intended to assess whether U.S. trading partners provide effective intellectual property protection. Do you agree that the focus of the Special 301 report should be to directly call out countries and practices that injure Americans' interests, rather than to simply abstractly address what IP measures benefit the interests of our trading partners?
Senator Crapo, your question about Special 301 is an excellent one. I think sitting here before you today, my answer would be that I believe that Special 301 should be considered one of the tools in the IP enforcement and monitoring toolbox, and that its use should be focused on effectiveness and making it as effective as possible in promoting the interests and resolving the problems for America's innovators.
Well, thank you. And as my question implies, I'm very concerned about getting a much stronger focus on IP protection in our U.S. trade negotiations and activities. Do you personally support the notion that's been put out about appointing a chief innovation and intellectual property negotiator at the USTR?
So, Senator Crapo, I know we've talked about this before.
Yes.
The position has been created in law. I believe it was in 2015. And the position has actually not been filled before. I know that there are senators who are in this very room right now who were critical in the creation of that position. What I commit to you today is to be in consultation with all of you on what you intended for that position and to address how we can accomplish the goals that we share.
Well, thank you. And my time has run out. I was going to also ask a question on digital services, but Senator Wyden covered that. I just want to indicate to you that I strongly support the concerns that Senator Wyden raised with you as well.
We'll work together on that. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. In this time, congratulations. Extremely pleased to see President Biden put forward your name for this very, very important position. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you as well about specific issues for Michigan. We make things and grow things in Michigan, and we need markets, but we also need a level playing field. And your work on trade enforcement and creating that level playing field is very important. I'm always telling folks in Michigan we want to export our products, not our jobs, and so I think that's really our goal. The pandemic has wreaked havoc on families, the economy, in so many different ways. But I want to touch one specific one today that's really right in front of us in Michigan and across the country, and that's the vulnerability of our global supply chains. Right now, for example, our manufacturers of automobiles, home appliances, other products are being forced to shut down a line or a plant temporarily because of a single company in Taiwan, which has reduced its shipments of semiconductor chips to our manufacturers. It's only a slight change, but we've seen profound losses, billions of dollars in losses in key U.S. manufacturers because of that decision. So I've raised this with multiple people within the Biden administration. I've met with the ambassador for Taiwan. Appreciate her attention to this. I know people are focused on this now, and I very much appreciate and commend President Biden's executive order to conduct a thorough supply chain review. This is incredibly important. In fact, we need these chips being made in the United States. And that certainly is something that we all need to be working on. If confirmed, how do you view the role of the USTR in addressing these really important supply chain issues?
Senator Stabenow, if confirmed, I will really look forward to being at USTR to bring USTR's talents and insights to bear on the interagency process and the coordination and collaboration within the Biden-Harris administration to review and craft a strategy on supply chains and supply chain resilience.
Thank you. Let me turn now to workers in this process. As you know, the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Workers program expires June 30th of this year, and it's really important that this be reauthorized. I know the chairman agrees as well. I plan to reintroduce my TAA bill that permanently extends the TAA for Workers program. It expands eligibility, ensures petitions are certified quickly, provides states with more outreach tools, and expands training opportunities. So do you support the reauthorization of the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program? Do you support the kinds of reforms that I've just mentioned? And I wondered any other thoughts that you had on having a better TAA process for workers?
Senator Stabenow, I know how important the TAA program is for members of this committee and certainly members of the Ways and Means Committee and to the workers of America. I think that your question is a really timely one, given the disruptions that are happening in our economy today because of the pandemic and with respect to disruptions in trade flows. Let me begin by acknowledging that the TAA program is run by and administered by the Department of Labor. But clearly, the strong trade component of the program means that if confirmed as USTR, I will want to be part of that conversation. I will want to be part of that conversation with you and with the others in Congress to figure out how we can make our policies work better for our workers. And in my mind, the TAA program falls squarely into that category.
It's a very important part of the process, the agreement that we made moving forward in terms of focusing on our workers and that the workers aren't left behind in this process. So I really appreciate that. One final question on USMCA, and I so appreciate all your incredible work and leadership in this area in terms of enforcement. I'm glad to see that as of last December, Canada is now working to uphold its dairy market access commitments. So the first enforcement action was brought, which I thought was positive. But my question is, the previous USTR verbally agreed in a hearing last year to create a forum for vehicle suppliers and manufacturers to discuss USMCA implementation. And if confirmed, will you support creating a similar kind of consultation?
Senator Stabenow, if confirmed, you have my commitment to consultation and good process, which I firmly believe leads to good outcomes. So with respect to this particular forum, I don't know much about it yet, but I look forward to studying up on it, and I look forward to coming back to you with thoughts on it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank my colleague, Senator Grassley's next, and then Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations. I appreciated my telephone conversation with you. Last year, the United States took the first ever U.S.-Mexico-Canadian agreement enforcement action on Canada's dairy tariff rate quotas. The announcement showed that our government is going to be working real hard that our dairy farmers and processors realize additional markets access, because that was a big thing in the agreement. So we want it carried out. Last year, Canada undermined the agreement by setting aside a percentage of the quota for processors for so-called further processors, limiting U.S. dairy access. Are you going to pursue this same enforcement action?
Senator Grassley, I'm aware of the concerns about Canada's dairy policies, in particular the ones on which they made very clear promises as part of concluding USMCA. I also want to acknowledge that U.S.-Canada dairy tensions also feel like some of those U.S.-Canada issues that date back to the beginning of time. I know that Ambassador Lighthizer initiated consultations under the dispute settlement mechanism of the USMCA with Canada on this issue. If confirmed, I look forward to digging into this file also. I know how important it is to senators like yourself in your support for the new agreement. And I look forward to exploring all of the options in the agreement, all the tools we have to resolve the problem. I know that in this area that stakeholder consultation is going to be very, very important for us. And I look forward to the opportunity to engage.
Yeah. Our country and UK have been negotiating since May of 2020. Now that the UK has left the EU, we can bring our economic relationship to a level befitting our long-standing political special relationship. Will you continue that negotiation?
Senator Grassley, I too have followed the U.S.-UK discussions very closely from my perch over in the Ways and Means Committee. I think what I would say to you today is that I just observed that the initial notifications that Ambassador Lighthizer sent to this committee and to the Ways and Means Committee date back to, I believe, October 2018. So that's almost 2.5 years ago. If confirmed, it will be important to me to review the progress in the conversation so far, to review the objectives in light of all of the changes that have taken place in the last 2.5 years. As you've indicated, the UK has negotiated 2 agreements with the EU in the meantime, one to leave the EU, one on its future relationship with the EU. We have all been going through a pandemic reality for the last year, and we're all still in the midst of it, working to get out of it. I would want to have the opportunity, if confirmed, to review the discussions and the negotiations that have taken place so far in light of all of these developments in the most recent years and months.
I want to bring up ethanol in the country of Brazil. They have a 20% tariff on our ethanol going down there, and we let their ethanol come to the United States free of that. And so Lighthizer late last year tried to negotiate some and was not successful. Are you thinking about continuing those negotiations?
Senator Grassley, I know that you are a leading voice on the issue of ethanol trade. I commit to you that if confirmed, it would be my honor to come back to you to talk through this particular issue and trade irritant.
Okay, but you don't know whether you're inclined to continue those negotiations and try to force Brazil to be fair to us right now. I'm not saying down the road you won't change that, but you aren't prepared to say that now. Is that right?
Senator Grassley, I feel like at the moment I lack the preparation and the background to engage with you smartly on this issue.
Okay. This will be my last question. Our Department of Agriculture projected China would purchase 31 billion of U.S. farm exports this year. That's a little bit short of the 38 billion they were supposed to do, but that's still pretty positive news considering the virus. But the phase 1 deal wasn't only about purchases, it was also intended to result in structural changes to China. Do you intend to push China on those structural changes?
Senator Grassley, I'm glad you asked this question. So the agreement that we have with China is the agreement that we have, and there are promises that China made that China needs to deliver on. With respect to structural changes within China, I think that we would all be delighted to have those structural changes in China, to have our economies be more compatible. I think it is absolutely worth exploring with China, but I also want to note that those are conversations and those are roads that have been well worn by U.S. trade representatives before me. And so on this issue of the U.S.-China trade relationship, I would like to say that we need to be exploring all of our options.
I thank my colleague. We've got so many members here. Senator Cantwell very graciously said that Senator Carper could go next because he's got a meeting as time sensitive.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and my thanks to Senator Cantwell. Welcome. She's not here today, but I want to shout out to Lucy Chow, who is now my new legislative director, succeeding Jan Vielkelman, who's over your right shoulder. Lucy came to me right after the election. She said, Katherine Tai would be terrific. I called Richie Neal, and he said she would be terrific. Don't steal her. And they did. The administration stole her, but you got a good guy sitting over your right shoulder there, and Jan Vielkelman. So you also have sitting behind you your mom and your husband. I just want to say to your mom, thanks for raising this gal and share your willingness to share with all of us. And to our husband, thank you so much for your willingness to share your wife. We've been blessed with 2 terrific trade reps in the last 8, 12 years, Michael Froman and more recently Robert Lighthizer. And so you have, you follow some really good, exceptional people. I just want to, those 2 guys didn't agree on one thing, TPP. They didn't sharply disagree. Take 30 seconds. Just give us some idea. Is it a fool's errand to ever think we could sort of reopen and get back into a deal like that has 40% of the world trade, 12 nations were one of them. We're on the inside, China's on the outside, and the last administration pulled us out, I think, very foolishly. Any chance we could get back into there? Just take 30 seconds.
Senator Carper, are you really only going to give me 30 seconds?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Look,
and you can answer longer for the record, but just very, very briefly.
All right. let me try to be as brief as I can on this because I think it's an important question. I know it's a question that a lot of people, a lot of senators and House members are asking themselves. I think that the formula for TPP, which is for the United States to engage robustly with countries and economies with which it has a lot of shared interests, economic interests, and also strategic interests, in particular with respect to those interests in Asia and with respect to the challenges coming from China. That is a solid equation, if you will. But I also want to acknowledge that sitting before you here today in 2021, that the world is very different in important ways from the way the world was in 2015 and 2016. And so if confirmed, what I would like to do is to work with the administration, work with you and your colleagues in the Senate and in the House.
You can stop right there. It's a deal. Thank you. Let me turn the page. As chair, I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Committee on Environment and Public Works. We have a particular interest, as you may recall, in environmental trade policy. As a lead congressional negotiator for the new NAFTA, you and your team were instrumental in securing the strongest ever environmental standards and a free trade agreement. Thank you for that. Kudos. Of course, the new NAFTA isn't perfect, and it does not include everything that I and many of my colleagues would have liked to see with regard to environmental protection. At the same time, though, one of the improvements that I'm most excited about are the new environmental monitoring and enforcement tools and resources, some of which my office worked with you to develop and include in the new NAFTA implementing legislation. Should you be confirmed, what steps would you take to ensure that the U.S. Trade Rep is making full use of these tools so that those who break the rules are actually held accountable? Just a brief comment.
Senator Carper, to maximally use the tools that have been built into the USMCA will require USTR to work closely with partner agencies, whether it's the EPA, the Department of Commerce, NOAA, USDA, and others, CBP, on an enforcement strategy. I believe that the agency institutions required have started to be built up. And if confirmed, I would be keen to continue to make sure that those tools and those entities are made as useful as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hyde. I want to take a minute and link trade policy and the environment and climate change, if I could. While labor standards have been a traditional area of focus for our trade policies, robust environmental standards, as you know, have been a more recent area of focus. It's a great area of focus for this administration. I've long been interested in ensuring parity between labor and environmental standards in our trade policies. After all, safeguarding our environment and addressing climate change require a global response, as you know. That's why I support policies such as adding environmental standards to the Generalized System of Preferences program, and which promotes, as you know, economic development in developing nations. Question, can you discuss with us briefly how you would approach reviewing other aspects of the trade policies that would benefit from being more closely linked to the environment and climate change going forward?
Senator Carper, I will try to keep my response short, which is I believe that trade policy has a lot to contribute to the climate effort. Trade policy is about working with other countries. Sometimes it's cooperative, sometimes it's more contentious, but climate is a collective challenge that's going to require a collective solution, and trade policy, I believe, will be able to contribute to that. I also want to note that the rest of the world is coming up with its own climate solutions, and that means that as other countries and economies begin to regulate in this area, climate and trade policies become a part of our competitive policy landscape, and that is another area where I believe that trade can contribute.
Good. Mr. Chairman, thanks for the time. You know, I would just say in closing, we have a great opportunity to lead on climate change. It's a great opportunity to lead.
You indeed.
She's a big part of that.
You're the leader.
Thank you.
Our next three will be Senator Cornyn, Senator Cantwell, and Senator Menendez. Senator Cornyn.
Ms. Ty, congratulations on your nomination. Let me just start where Senator Carper, the point he raised about TPP. The one thing we have that China does not have is friends and allies. And I think we improve our negotiating position on economic and national security matters by allying with our friends. And so I would certainly encourage you and the administration to look at re-entering that. I thought that was a good idea by the Obama administration. I regret that the Trump administration decided only bilateral trade agreements made sense and not multilateral agreements, especially under these unique circumstances. And I would also suggest that we look at India as a potential addition to the TPP. We've grown much closer to India, of course, the world's largest democracy, one that believes in the rule of law, as we do, and a great counterweight as well. We have entered into what's known as the Quad when it comes to national security cooperation with India, and I think it would be appropriate to include India in those discussions as well. I guess that's not so much a question as is a statement. Let me also echo some of the concerns raised by Senator Stabenow when it comes to semiconductors. As we had a great visit with the president yesterday on supply chain vulnerability, and there's probably no greater current example of that vulnerability than the automobile manufacturing industry in this country. Doesn't have the semiconductors necessary to be able to build the cars that it could sell if they could just get the semiconductors to build them with. If the COVID-19 has shown us anything, it's shown us our vulnerabilities to supply chains, and that's true whether it was PPE, as you'll recall, when the virus hit, made mainly by China. But semiconductors, of course, as you know, basically anything with an off and on switch relies on semiconductors, and the high-end semiconductors manufactured in Taiwan are the sole source of some of the most sophisticated technology in the world, including everything from the F-35 down to cell phones. So what role does the U.S. trade representative play in bolstering our vulnerable supply chains? I realize you may not be the end-all, be-all, but does the USTR play any role in that, and what would you suggest?
Senator Cornyn, I know what a leader you are on the issue of semiconductor supply chains, and I know that a lot of the most innovative thinking on this in the Congress is coming from members of this committee, bipartisan. I think what I'd like to share in terms of thinking about the potential role of USTR, and if confirmed, my role in working through a supply chain strategy, is that I think that U.S. trade policy, global trade policy, a lot of the assumptions that we have based our trade programs on has maximized efficiency without regard to the requirement for resilience. And so I think that trade policy, setting aside the focus on consultations and collaboration in this issue area, trade policy itself needs to be rethought and reformed with resilience and strategy in mind.
Well, I appreciate your comments. I think Congress also needs to reform our practices when it comes to strategic investments, because it's due to our ossified nature of our appropriations process, setting spending caps and then allocating to various subcommittees in the Appropriations Committee. There's really no flexibility outside of emergency appropriations or perhaps maybe tax policy, like the tax credit that Senator Warner and I have proposed as part of our Chips for America bill. I think we have to look at all the tools that are available to us in this competition with China, as President Biden and all of us have recognized. This is a threat to our dominance and economically as well as to our national security, and I think we would be negligent in the performance of our responsibilities and the trust we hold for the American people if we didn't rise to the challenge of dealing with that. So we look forward to working with you and the administration and as well as all of my colleagues in trying to fill that gap. Thank you.
Just very, very quickly, on this point of the semiconductor, issue, Senator Crapo and I consider this a top bipartisan priority for this committee. We have in our part of the world some of the arguably purest technology companies in this field anywhere. So we are looking forward to working with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle on it. It's hugely important to the American economy. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say again to Betty Tai, congratulations on your daughter's nomination. And we so appreciate you being here today. And you've raised a very smart and talented daughter, and she's going to be very busy. So at least I hope she's going to be very busy. I'd like to follow on kind of the point that Senator Cornyn was making, which is I'm done with the Trump administration approach to trade. I feel like when I look at the analytics there, Moody Analytics estimated that the trade war caused China caused us nearly 300,000 American jobs, that U.S. companies lost $1.7 trillion in the price of their stocks as a result. J.P. Morgan estimates the trade war cost American households between $600 and $1,000 per year. So I'm hoping that you and the Biden administration are going to embrace a new trade regime. And while I mentioned to you, I'm all for enforcement, I'm all for capacity building. I've spent many, many hours of my time getting those into aspects of the USMCA and other agreements. We cannot just be about those aspects. We have to be for opening up new markets. And I hope that you will take that back to the Biden team and answer some questions today about what we can do to opening up those markets. So particularly, my colleague just mentioned India. What can we do to open up the Indian market to U.S. apples and reduce the horrific tariffs that are on those apples, particularly with the Trump administration terminating the GSP program? And so it is basically, when would the Biden administration restore India's GSP status and help us with apple exports?
Senator Cantwell, it's great to see you today. I really enjoyed our conversation earlier, and I've taken away from it your interest in apples and aircraft, and for the U.S. to be at the top rung of the ladder, which in my interpretation means your interest in the U.S. leading on trade around the world. On your question on GSP in India, let me just say that if confirmed, this is very high on my radar, coming from the Hill, as I will be, to USTR. And I don't have a good answer for you right now for lack of having good briefing just by virtue of being on the outside, but it's something that I look forward to engaging with you on robustly.
When China joined the WTO in 2001, it agreed to a tariff rate on wheat, so it committed to imports of up to 9.64 million metric tons of wheat. And as a result, they definitely haven't made that. And there are other markets in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Indonesia, that also offer great potential. So what will the Biden administration do to help us increase wheat exports in Asia overall?
So I know that wheat is a particular interest for Washington State as well, and part of the agricultural and agricultural trade agenda for the Biden administration will be to help American agriculture, American farmers build back better as well, and trade will be a tool in that. I'm quite confident. I did want to take an opportunity to address something that you had said earlier about concerns that the Biden administration will stand still on trade. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with you that to the extent that I have been privy to conversations or have been made aware of the Biden administration's outlook, I don't expect, if confirmed, to be put on the back burner at all.
Great. Well, I'll tell your mom right now, I'll be right behind you, pushing you, okay? Because I come from a trading state, and I believe that we live in a global economy. I want to talk to you about digital trade, but the notion that, the last 4 years is a way to approach this, it's not. I believe trade changes culture. So I'm with Senator Cornyn. We should be engaging. As I said to you, I'm glad you remember, we should be on the top rung of the ladder discussing what a trade regime when 95% of consumers live outside of the United States. Can I just ask you one last thing about the European issue on Airbus? Will you prioritize reaching agreement on commercial aircraft subsidies to end European subsidies and tariffs?
Senator Cantwell, this dispute has been going on since, I believe, 2005, 2006. It is arguably one of the disputes that started to break the WTO dispute settlement system. I think that between the U.S. and the EU, if confirmed, I would very much be interested in figuring out, pardon the pun, how to land this particular plane, because it has been going on for a very long time.
Well, I think, leaning into the regimes that we do have and making them work seems like a really positive thing to be doing to me. And then again, going back and opening up markets for U.S. products. I think this is what you'll hear from all my colleagues today, because we do believe, as my colleague from Michigan said, that we do make and grow things, and we'd like them to reach new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Senator Menendez.
Thank you. Ms. Tai, congratulations on your nomination. After the last 4 years, it's clear that we need more transparency in our trade policy making, and USTR is one of the few cabinet agencies that does not have an inspector general. As we've seen across the executive branch, inspectors general help agencies do their jobs better by promoting greater transparency, accountability, effectiveness, all which leads to better results. Last year, I led all the Finance Committee Democrats in introducing legislation to establish an Inspector General for USTR so we can use this proven effective tool to help us make better trade policy in the years ahead. Are you supportive of having an Inspector General at USTR?
Senator Menendez, thank you for this question. I know the leadership role you've had on this particular issue. I think what I would say is understanding that inspectors general answer to the mandate of overseeing and ensuring that there's no waste, fraud, or abuse going on in the executive branch. I am very supportive of accountability and transparency, in particular with respect to Congress. I know that there is no Inspector General apparatus set up for the Executive Office of the President agencies. I'm not aware of the specific legalities around that, but with respect to your desire for more transparency and accountability, I'm very supportive of that.
I appreciate that. I recognize that USTR's placement in the Executive Office of the President poses some unique challenges, but they're not novel or insurmountable. So I look forward to working with you to address those issues. Let me turn to China as well. You've heard this. We all believe collectively on a bipartisan basis, one of our biggest challenges. Last Congress, I led in the introduction of the American Leads Act. It is a cross-jurisdictional piece of legislation to not only confront China, but to compete with China at the end of the day. Do you believe that domestic investments are part of our response to the challenge of competing with China?
Absolutely, Senator.
And particularly at USTR, there is a special investigations unit that would be responsible for trade agreement violations and Section 301 investigations. One of the things that you can do is to get U.S. companies who refuse to share information with the U.S. government about China's predatory practices out of fear that the Chinese authority will discriminate against the firm. But knowing about those predatory practices are important to us as we deal with China. Is that something that you believe that you would pursue that is of value to us?
So, Senator, just to be clear, is your question whether or not I would be interested in pursuing deploying this particular group at USTR in working with stakeholders who may be shy about sharing the problems they're running into in China?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One of the most important things, including in the competition with China, is that innovation and R&D has to be a central part of our response. As you may know, New Jersey is a center of innovation from telecom to medical products to pharmaceuticals. So it's critical for manufacturers in my state that USTR advance and defend strong intellectual property rules in our trade agreements and at global fora like the World Trade Organization? If confirmed, would you work to protect American innovators and the millions of American workers in IP-intensive industries?
Senator Menendez, I know New Jersey's place in America's innovation economy, and I know that one of the things that distinguishes our economy is the innovation that goes on here. I think that is in large part due to the balance that is achieved by the Congress in terms of our intellectual property protection and rights laws. Yes, I believe it is important for our trade policies to reflect that balance as well between the rights of innovators and the rights of those seeking access to the fruits of their innovations.
Finally, let me turn to Europe. USTR, following on Senator Cantwell's, imposed 25% tariffs on EU food products such as cheese, wine, and olive oil after winning a case against the EU. But those tariffs have been devastating to food importers and restaurants in New Jersey, struggling particularly due to the pandemic. They can ill afford to have increased costs at a time like this. And a year and a half into these retaliatory tariffs, I don't think anyone can say that the strategy of targeting food and beverage products on an aircraft dispute is working to bring a resolution to this dispute. Would you make it a priority to review the Airbus tariffs and listen to our food importers, our restaurants, so that the businesses that have nothing to do with the underlying dispute can get some relief?
Senator Menendez, I know the disruption and the pain that these particular tariffs are imposing on the affected stakeholders. I also want to acknowledge that this is part and parcel of the longstanding aircraft dispute between the U.S. and EU, and in some ways, this is the way the WTO system is supposed to work. You inflict pain on each other's stakeholders to try to motivate each other to come to a resolution. So I think my answer to you will essentially be a version of my answer to Senator Cantwell, which is, I think at the core of this, whether the tariff piece or the overall dispute is the need for the U.S. and EU to come together to figure out an answer.
I'd like to find ways to create challenges for them, but not for us in doing so. Cheese doesn't fly.
I thank my colleague. We're going to just keep going, and Senator Portman and then Senator Thune.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Tai, as you know from our meeting last month, I'm delighted that you've been nominated. And I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Tai, though, behind you, for her work on finding alternative ways to treat opioid addiction. Incredibly important issue. On trade, as you know from your time at USTR, it's a very special place. It's full of career experts on trade. Almost all of whom could make a lot more money in the private sector. They're committed, they're passionate, and I enjoy it. I know you're going to thrive there, largely because of commitments that I made when I was before the Senate Finance Committee 16 years ago. I conducted what was called the top to bottom review of China. We issued an extensive report. We also established a prosecutor. I said, we need a prosecutor just for China, who became sort of the chief counsel for China. You later had that job. Let me ask you if you would make a commitment today to update that top to bottom review. Everybody in this panel has talked about China. I mean, I think it's clearly the most important single trade issue we face. Would you commit today to updating that and providing it to the committee?
Senator Portman, I think that the Biden administration itself is committed to a holistic review on China and a U.S.-China strategy. If confirmed at USTR, I think that's an excellent idea. And yes, absolutely, I would want to make sure that that review happens at USTR as well.
Great. Well, I'm sorry to surprise you with that, but I just was thinking about it as we heard all the questions, and I think it is timely. A lot has changed in those 16 years. Mostly changed in the way that China's become even more competitive, used even more subsidies. And under the current regime has decided that state-owned enterprises and heavy subsidies are going to be the norm rather than the exception. And this goes to semiconductors. And there's been a lot of discussion today on semiconductors. I appreciate what the chairman said, the ranking member, Senator Stabenow, Senator Cornyn, and others. I mean, this is an urgent issue. We're looking at serious impacts on our economy because of the supply chain issues. Here's what China's doing on semiconductors. They're heavily subsidizing it. One study found that major Chinese semiconductor firms
have received subsidies equal to 20 to 40% of their revenues, subsidies of up to 40% of the revenues. We can't compete with that. And so, phase one with China was a good start. And Bob Lighthizer hasn't gotten enough love in the room today. He did a lot of hard work on that, and I appreciate that. But we need to take it to the next level because it's really more than just non-market. I think it's techno-nationalist approach to trade that we have to stand up to. How would you propose we do a better job of addressing those unfair industrial subsidies and their proliferation, particularly by state-owned enterprises?
Senator Portman, I think this is part and parcel of some of the most important questions that are facing us today, not just on trade, but across the board, which is how we compete more effectively with China. China's done an incredible job of articulating its ambitions in its 5-year plans and accomplishing a lot of the goals that it has set for itself. You mentioned semiconductors, and I want to acknowledge that that is an area where there's a lot of focus right now, which is really great, about how we more strategically shape our supply chains. I would just say that the Chinese are not shy about articulating their ambitions, and semiconductors are just a part of what we have to compete with. We can't compete by doing the things China does, so we have to figure out how we compete, marshaling all the tools and resources that we have in the U.S. government.
That's the idea, of the CHIPS Act. We talked about it earlier. I was at the White House yesterday, a good meeting on that. Let's switch to WTO for a second. The World Trade Organization was established to have rules that were beneficial to countries like ours that are willing to, play by the rules, level playing field. And it's important that we have those rules for our exporters. But the current system seems broken to me. The WTO negotiation role has faded. Instead, we have activism by the appellate body that has constrained our ability, frankly, to respond to China's non-market activities as well as other countries. This is a critique that's longstanding. It's bipartisan. Senator Cardin, who was here earlier, I think is coming back, and I introduced legislation on WTO reforms. I know you've seen those. Again, USTR Lighthizer made some progress on this, but we've got to continue this work. My question for you, I guess, would be, you have said you want a positive agenda for WTO reform. Specifically, what do you propose we do to restore the WTO to being a forum for negotiation rather than litigation?
Senator Portman, it's a special honor to be speaking to you as a senator on this committee, but also a former USTR. And as such, you, I know, have special insights into the U.S. relationship and the U.S. role at the WTO. I just want to say the United States was a founding member of the WTO and of the GATT before that. It has always been a leader in Geneva. We can't afford not to continue to be engaged and a leader in Geneva at the WTO. The WTO does need reform, and I believe that the focus should be the WTO now in its 26th year of existence. We need to be having hard conversations in Geneva in a constructive way, to be asking what is the value of the WTO to its members? Is it accomplishing the goals that its founders and members expect of it? And also, in today's world, in 2021, how does the WTO rise to the challenges of today's world, whether the challenges that are facing all of us or the challenges that exist between the WTO's countries and members?
Thank you. Senator Thune.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tai, cattle producers in South Dakota and across our nation work hard to produce high-quality beef. Americans recognize this, and by and large, they want to know where their food is coming from, which is why I'm a longtime supporter of country of origin labeling. And while the World Trade Organization, which you were just discussing, made a ruling in 2015 on cool for beef, pork, and other meat products, this remains an important issue to many producers in my home state. In fact, the South Dakota legislature just passed a resolution calling on the Biden administration to remove barriers to mandatory country of origin labeling when negotiating trade deals. And so I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the nominee for Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, and that is, what are your thoughts on the WTO's cool ruling and its impact on U.S. producers, particularly its impact on beef producers? And then, if, as a follow-up, if confirmed, would you be willing to work with me on finding a path forward, preferably in a WTO-compliant manner, on country of origin labeling to help address the concerns of not only South Dakotans, but livestock producers all across the country.
Senator Thune, I can't remember if I mentioned this in our earlier conversation, but the first case that I was handed when I walked in the door at USTR in 2007 was to take on the longstanding case between the U.S. and EU on the EU import ban on U.S. beef. So I feel like I learned a lot about the U.S. industry back then, and I myself obviously was raised on American beef and am a very happy consumer of it. On the WTO cool ruling, that's not been a popular ruling back here at home with senators like yourself and the stakeholders themselves, and also on the other side of the aisle in terms of those who really supported cool as a consumer right and for the policy space for Congress to act. As you noted, this is an area where USTR and USDA have a lot of good work to do together. If confirmed, I look forward to working with Secretary Vilsack on this, and I do commit to you to coming back to you to talk about the continued interest of yours and the industry in having country of origin labeling that will survive WTO challenge.
Thank you. And I would say that, we have labels on so many things that come into this country. The things that we wear, it's ironic to me that we can't have labels on the things we put in our mouths. And the American people, I think, deserve to know where their beef is coming from. Our farmers and ranchers depend on open markets and reliable trading relationships around the world. Expanding market access and ensuring our producers remain competitive is a key to stabilizing the U.S. ag economy and powering our national economy forward. If confirmed as our nation's lead trade negotiator, what specific steps will you take to expand U.S. ag products in new markets such as Southeast Asia and Africa? And I would ask if you could just comment too in talking about that phase one on China. Our exports to China significantly increased since November, which is welcome news to American agriculture, but they're still quite a way short of their phase one commitments. What USTR would intend to do with respect to making sure that they comply with the phase one targets. And then also, it's a lot in there, but expanding market access is critical. And so equally important is the proper enforcement of the trade agreements we already have, which if confirmed, the question I would have is what steps would you take to ensure that our trading partners are playing by the rules agreed to in existing agreements, and in particular USMCA?
Senator Thune, those are a lot of questions in there. So there's a lot for me to respond to, but if I focus on the main themes, I think that I would like to thank you for this opportunity to clarify when we talk about, and when I talk about being confirmed and advancing a worker-centered trade policy, that workers does absolutely include agricultural workers, our farmers, our small family farmers in particular, real people who make up the American economy. So I want to make that clear. And in terms of a trade policy that works for our workers, a trade policy that works for agricultural workers is very much a part of that focus as well. On the enforcement side, on USMCA, I talked about earlier in my opening statement about caring and nurturing the agreements that we have to make sure that they deliver on the promises that have been made. That also goes for the other trade agreements, obviously, that we have under our belt. And so I just want to make clear that that is a priority for me.
Phase one China as well.
Phase one China as well. Different kind of agreement, right, but it's an agreement.
Right. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I see my time expired. I have perhaps a question on network security, but I will defer that or perhaps submit it for the record. But Ms. Tai, thank you, and we look forward to working with you.
I thank my colleague for his courtesy. This is going to be a hectic morning. We've got now 4 senators on the web who are going to be asking questions: Senator Cardin, Senator Cassidy, Senator Brown, and Senator Langford. Senator Cardin, are you out there in cyberspace?
I'm with you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Ty, thank you very much for your willingness to continue in public life. We very much appreciate that. I want to first ask you about a provision that I led an effort in 2015 to include as a principal negotiating objective good governance, anti-corruption. And I know that the Biden administration has been very strong in its commitment to deal with corruption and recognizes it's a national security issue and all countries can do better. So can you share with me how you intend to promote good governance, rule of law, anti-corruption in any trade negotiations or agreements that take place under your watch if you are confirmed and when you are confirmed?
Senator Cardin, it's an excellent question. Good governance, rule of law, anti-corruption are fundamental values that we as Americans want to hold ourselves to, and that we will want to hold our trading partners to. So I believe your question is, if confirmed, how that will be incorporated in trade policies under my leadership at USTR. And I would just commit to you that these types of questions are exactly the ones that I hope will animate the trade policy and trade agenda that the Biden administration undertakes.
Well, thank you. I just want to compliment Ambassador Lighthizer. He worked very closely with our committee, worked very closely with our office in regards to the good governance provisions. So I would just request that we have a close working relationship as you negotiate agreements as to making sure that we increase the standards on good governance. It's something that I think is very important to our country. Let me go to the USMCA includes a standalone chapter on small business, which I was very appreciative to see in that. I chair the Small Business Committee in this Congress. So can you share with us how you intend to help small businesses in negotiations? They have a harder time, as you know, in dealing in international trade. So what priority will you give efforts so that we can include our smaller businesses in international trade opportunities?
Well, Senator Cardin, I completely agree with you in terms of the importance of small businesses to the American economy. Small businesses, mom and pop shops, these are our companies that have faces and names and operate like families. I think a worker-centered trade policy and more broadly, my interpretation of a Biden administration foreign policy that works for the middle class will really prioritize the interests of small businesses. I know exactly what you mean in terms of how difficult it can be for smaller businesses, smaller scale businesses to access the levers of trade. I know that there are some really good programs that are housed in different parts of the government. I would commit to you that if confirmed, I will make it a priority and I will take care to ensure that there is the coordination that is needed to make those programs work and to build on those programs where we can.
Yeah, the voices of small businesses need to be heard as you're negotiating these agreements. And I know that the first questions asked to you by Chairman Wyden, would you agree to participate in our committees? I'm going to ask that you work with us on the Small Business Committee as you do your trade agreements so that we can have input as to how we can expand opportunities for smaller companies. I want to follow up on the point that Senator Portman made in regards to the WTO. The two of us will be introducing some legislation in that regard. You talked about the reform in WTO. I'm a strong believer in our participation in the WTO, but we know that it needs to be reformed. So as you're looking at ways in which to strengthen the role that WTO can play that can be in the best interest of the United States, I hope that you will share those thoughts with our committee and that we can work together to strengthen the U.S. role in reforming the WTO.
Senator Cardin, the U.S. participation in the WTO is made possible by the work of this committee, the House Ways and Means Committee. And I know that the investment that members like yourself in thinking through U.S. participation at institutions like the WTO is critical. So that is an easy commitment for me to make to be very fully engaged with you, with Senator Portman, and others in the Congress who care about the WTO.
Thank you. And again, thank you for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I also want to emphasize, because the senator is talking about something very important, that Ms. Tai was a very strong ally when it came to promoting the rule of law and the anti-corruption provisions in the USMCA, and we thank her for that. Senator Cassidy. Senator Cassidy, you out there on the web? All right. It appears that we should move on. Senator Brown, are you there on the web? Senator Langford, are you on the web? All right. I believe Senator Bennett may be with us in person. If that's the case, we'll hold on that. Pardon me?
Senator Cassidy's having audio problems, so he may...
Good.
Bennett can't chair, Bennett can't chair, so I'll have to find somebody else.
I believe we've got Senator Bennett coming in person, and I hope that we will be able to deal with our audio challenges. Senator Cassidy, is Senator Cassidy ready, or would he like us to go to Senator Bennett? Why don't we just go to Senator Bennett, and then we will take Senator Cassidy. Senator Bennett. And if you all can make sure that Senator Cassidy will be next, that'd be great. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, it's going to take me one moment to... Thanks, Ms. Tai. It's good to see you, and I'm glad you're here.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing your mom. Trade is really important to Colorado's agricultural economy, as you and I discussed when we had a conversation I really enjoyed, by the way. I learned a lot from it. As producers in Colorado contend with severe drought and labor challenges, I'd like to think that our trade policy is one area that could not be a headwind, but might actually support them and bring some stability. That has not been the case over the last 4 years. Our farmers have lost markets. They've faced higher input costs, and their products were hit with retaliatory tariffs. On top of that, the highly touted Phase 1 deal with China is failing to live up to expectations, and American farmers and ranchers produce top-notch agricultural goods, and I'm hoping that in the years ahead, they'll once again be able to compete fairly on the global stage. I'd just like you to talk a little bit about how we can recover and grow markets for American agriculture while also holding bad actors like China accountable. How are we going to begin to undo the damage and take advantage of our posture as it is right now over the preceding 4 years, and how will farmers and ranchers factor into your review of existing tariffs?
Senator Bennett.
I have one other question I want to get to, but sorry.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. I will try to make sure to try to keep my answers short. I just want to observe that I think that with respect to our trade policies for the past several decades, that we often fall into a pattern where one sector of our economy and one segment of our workers feel like their livelihoods and their opportunities are sacrificed to another part of our economy. And in the past, it may have been our manufacturing workers who felt like they were sacrificed to the interests of our farmers. And the past couple of years, perhaps our farmers felt like they were being sacrificed for the interests of our manufacturing workers. I think one of our challenges going forward is to figure out how to craft our trade policies and how to coordinate our trade policies with our other domestic and foreign policies to break out of that pattern so that what we are doing in trade is coordinated with what we are doing in other areas, but also not forcing us to pit one of our segments of our workers and economy against another.
That is a very good answer. And I had ups and downs with your predecessor in this job, but one of the downs was when I asked him a similar question about our farmers and ranchers, his answer was they have our sympathy. And what they don't need is sympathy. What they need is a coherent trade policy that's going to support their work. Ms. Todd, President Trump had a go-it-alone approach. I think he was proud of it, launching trade wars around the world that alienated our allies and undermined an effective global response to China. At the same time, China was strategically investing in Mediterranean and African countries, expanding its reach in the South China Sea region with the One Belt and the One Belt, One Road initiative. And while China is an important market for agricultural products, as we've just discussed, they've failed to live up to their agreement. How will you work with partners and allies and the broader administration to hold China accountable for its mercantilist and predatory practices? I should say that, the Chinese Communist Party, rather than, not the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. You mentioned earlier in an answer to one of my colleagues that there had been a well-worn path trod by former trade ambassadors, sort of expecting China to somehow adopt our system of, economic system. That's clearly not going to happen. So what tools are available to us, maybe even beyond the trade tools, to be able to push back and ensure that we continue to lead?
Senator Bennett, again, I feel like this is part of the most consequential questions that we collectively, as servants in the U.S. government, will need to figure out. Just in terms of how to answer your question, I guess there are a couple ways that I would think about it. One is rules that China has clearly signed up for and agreed to. Those may be agreements that it has struck with trading partners. They may be the WTO rules, so rules that they've taken on as a member of a larger organization. And when we are in that area, we have designed for use enforcement tools to engage with the Chinese, hold them accountable. You promised to do X. You need to deliver on X. There are also a lot of areas that are gray areas where the rules are not clear or where we don't have rules yet. And I think that in that area, in terms of working with others, we have a couple options. One is that we create and we craft new rules to address the gray areas. Separately, I think that that provides us with a lot of opportunity as well to think strategically about how to respond to the strategies that China is pursuing.
Thank you, Ms. Tai. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague. We're going to just keep going and try to stick with our queue. Senator Cassidy is next. Senator Brown may intervene, but then Senator Langford, and we can get all three of you before the vote. Senator Cassidy.
Sounds great. Ms. Tai, thank you very much. I enjoyed our phone conversation. I like the nuanced way in which you spoke of our relationship with China. And so I was listening elsewhere. You couldn't hear me, but I could hear you, but that's another story. And so thank you for that perspective. A couple of issues important to my state. You've already spoken to Senator Grassley regarding the UK trade agreement. Right now, they love our rice. We'd love to sell a lot of Louisiana rice in the UK. Turns out they love it. The issue, of course, is there's 25% countervailing tariffs as it's caught up in other aspects of our trade war. So just to encourage that that be resolved ASAP so the folks back home who work in rice mills have fuller employment, if you will. Also a parochial issue back home is shrimp. India is sending a lot of shrimp here. They heavily subsidize, I'm told, their shrimpers. And then the EU is refusing to accept it over phytosanitary concerns. So we're getting subsidized shrimp refused elsewhere because of phytosanitary concerns, putting my folks out of business. And if they want to compete on price, that's fine, but make sure it's clean, doesn't have antibiotics, etc., but also that it's not unfairly subsidized. What tools do you think you have as USTR in that role to address that particular issue?
Senator Cassidy, thank you for the questions and for raising your interest in the interests of the state of Louisiana in rice and shrimp. In terms of the tools that are available, we have an existing toolbox, and some of them are within USTR's purview. I imagine that some of them are in Commerce's purview, and other agencies have a role to play as well. So my first level answer to you is, if confirmed, I would want to take every opportunity to work this issue, not just at USTR, but in partnership with the other agencies that have a stake and have a role to play. More broadly, though, I think that, we have our existing trade tools and trade enforcement tools. I think that there are a number of challenges that are facing the U.S. economy, U.S. workers and industries, where there may be opportunities for us to think about new tools to address the challenges that we face today. So maybe it's a bit of a two-part answer in terms of the tools that we've got, and then an interest in working on new tools that are more appropriate to the challenges that we have today.
I would love to work with you on those new tools because it does seem as if we need creativity. The current process is so cumbersome that people exploit it for so long, they get their way, if you will, and then they gradually kind of go through a third country, and then we end up with the same problem all over. Next, another thing, counterfeit goods. There's stories on the internet of the child getting the Christmas gift, it has a battery and it explodes. It seems to be the name brand product, which we expect to be safe, but in reality, it is a knockoff, and that knockoff is unsafe. So concerned about that, and I know that you have addressed that. What can USTR do to combat the rising tide of counterfeits?
Senator Cassidy, USTR has a number of existing tools with respect to, I think this falls into intellectual property protection. We spoke about it a little bit earlier, I think, with Ranking Member Crapo about the Special 301 report. Again, I think this is also an area where you look at the rules and the tools that you have in terms of the agreements and enforcement mechanisms that are available internationally, but also you look at what you have available domestically. And, not to sound like a broken record, but as we have a lot of experience in this area, I am sure that there are people in the think tank world, here on the Hill, in the stakeholder world, and within the U.S. government who have ideas about how we can make our enforcement of these rights more effective. Let me finish with this because we spoke of this on the phone. Obviously, the U.S. has a trade relationship. And in those trade relations, those treaties with Mexico, for example, Central America, we have certain labor standards and environmental standards we expect them to adhere to, and we enforce. China does not enforce those. And with that lack of enforcement, it turns out to be an expense, an avoided expense, to further subsidize somebody moving from Mexico or Guatemala, moving their factory to China. It strengthens the Chinese economy, but it weakens that of a key trade partner of the U.S. We've spoken about that, but if you don't mind, for this broader audience, if you will, could you comment on that? I would be happy to, Senator Cassidy. I think that for a very long time, our trade policies were based on an assumption that the more we traded with each other and the more liberalized our trade, the more peace and prosperity there would be, that the rising tide would lift all boats. I think that what we see is, in the parlance of some of the economists who've been thinking about this, that over time, the trends we see are a race to the bottom in many times, that with increased economic activity and trade activity, we aren't necessarily seeing that bring up standards with respect to workers and environmental protection, that there is an opportunity for competition with lower standards across the board. I think this prompts us to really have this inform our rethink of our strategic trade policies and figure out how trade policy can be conducted in a way that it does truly lift up all boats, that it doesn't just create a larger pie, but it I don't know where I'm going with this particular.
I know where you're going with that. We would protect the U.S. worker as we enforce those standards. Thank you.
We're going to have to move on. Senator Brown is on the web, and then it would be Lankford and Daines. Senator Brown, are you available?
I am here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thrilled to be here, and congratulations, Ms. Ty, for you. I understand. I got on late. I'm sorry I didn't hear your opening statement. I understood it brought tears to the eyes of some of my staff, and I'm so glad your mother is there, and please tell her, if I don't know if she can hear this now with how this technology works, but tell her she raised an incredible daughter. So, and I would also add that you made a great hire in Nora Todd. Your gain, my office's loss, but thank you for helping her do even more public service than she's already done. Congratulations. I enjoyed our meeting last I guess 6 weeks or so ago. I enjoyed especially, and what makes me excited about your nomination, so many things, but especially your work on the Brown-Wyden rapid response mechanism in the USMCA. You are exceptionally qualified for this job, and I support you with great enthusiasm. You gave a great speech to the National Foreign Trade Council Foundation. You talked about the humanity and the dignity of Americans. Your comments reminded me a lot of the dignity of work agenda that sort of informs what I do here, and I know informs much of what you've done. Can you talk a little bit about what a dignity of work trade agenda means to you, Ms. Tai?
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity to address this particular issue, which I think really lies at the heart of where U.S. trade policy needs to go in this next phase. I think that for a very long time, regular people, ordinary Americans and workers have felt disconnected from our trade policies, that there are policies that are concocted by people in places like Washington, Brussels, and Geneva that at best have not a lot of relevance to their lives or at worst undercut and undermine the livelihoods that they have been used to having. And I think that if confirmed, I would very much like to focus my efforts and contribute to the Biden administration's efforts is to center U.S. trade policy in terms of thinking through how does it affect regular people, American workers across the different sectors, and how do we make trade policy feel like, in Chairman Wyden's words, how do we expand the circle of winners in trade policy?
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. I voted, as you may remember, I voted for USMCA. It's the first trade agreement I've ever voted for. And I did because it included the Brown-Wyden rapid response mechanism, a provision will allow us to enforce labor standards quickly and at the factory level. My questions are pretty simple. Will you commit to using that provision to the maximum extent possible to defend the rights of workers in the United States and Mexico?
Yes, Senator Brown, and I would add that using that mechanism is also to reinforce the implementation of reforms that Mexico has made, so to reinforce Mexico's own reform efforts.
Good. Thank you. Senator Wyden and I also led the effort to make sure U.S. law prohibits any imports coming into our country that were made with forced labor. In the years since our amendment passed, the U.S. government has made some, but only some progress in forced labor enforcement. China's state-sanctioned large-scale forced labor program, especially for millions of Uyghurs and other Muslims, show that we need to do more. If confirmed, will you commit to making forced labor enforcement, particularly a crackdown on China's massive forced labor program, will you commit to making that a top priority?
Yes, Senator Brown, I think that the use of forced labor is probably the crudest example of the race to the bottom that I was talking about earlier with Senator Cassidy.
Thanks. As you, in the last question, Chairman Wyden, and I appreciate the time. From your time on Ways and Means, dignity of work trade agenda, you recognize as essential from your work. I can see that to building trust with Americans in Ohio and other states who know their livelihood and their families haven't been the focus of trade policy. My opposition to our trade policy has been grounded in the fact that it has really hurt workers in my state, across the industrial Midwest, and really nationally. My question is this in the last few seconds. What are some of the first things you'll do as USTR to start to regain the trust of Americans on trade? How do you plan to build in that framework in future trade negotiations? What do you start doing? What do you start saying? Listen to what I say, but watch what I do. What do we do to regain trust of Americans on trade?
Senator Brown, I think you start by listening, and you start by indicating that the formulators of U.S. trade policy care how it is impacting America and regular Americans. I know in my earlier conversation with you, we talked about trade's impact on the citizens and the residents of Mahoning Valley. I think that that is where you start. And in terms of where you go from there, then you not just have to listen, but you also have to take what you're hearing and translate that into an adjustment and changes to the approach that you have been taking.
Thank you, Ms. Tai. I look forward to working with you as USTR. Best wishes.
I thank my colleague very much. And as you and I have talked about, Ms. Tai, part of what Senator Brown and I set out to do was what you were touching on, is to try to bring Americans together in terms of the cause of creating more high-skill, high-wage jobs. And we thank you. Senator Langford.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tai, thanks for stepping up to be able to take this on. There are folks in Oklahoma right now that are working on wheat and cotton and beef and pork and chicken and manufactured goods that are all headed out of the country, that are very dependent on what you do and how well you do your job. So this does have a direct impact on a lot of people that I know their names because they're counting on not only maintaining good trade relationships, but expanding to new places. And the first question that I typically get from folks are, where are we expanding to next? Glad we have this agreement. Now, what's the next agreement that we're actually working on? Because they're always looking for new markets and new places because we produce great products in Oklahoma and the world would buy them if they had access to them and we could actually get the tariffs all worked out back and forth. So look forward to seeing your leadership there. And a lot of folks are counting on you in that. One of the other areas that goes the other direction is the issue of 301. And we've talked about this before. The 301 exclusion process is a process you don't care a thing about unless you're directly affected by it. And we've got multiple companies in Oklahoma that are. The 301 exclusion process is extremely important that it's run efficiently and that people get answers to it. Otherwise, they're directly affected, and so are all their employees. Tell me what you're going to do on that 301 exclusion process and how you're going to manage that.
Senator Langford, it's a great question, and I know that the 301 tariffs have touched directly a lot of people and have disrupted a lot of people's lives and livelihoods. I think what I would say to you is, if confirmed, that I would bring the focus that I spoke about earlier with Senator Garden about the emphasis on good governance, as well to the processes and the responsibilities that USTR has itself. So with respect to the exclusions process, just in the job that I've had over the past few years, I am aware of the many concerns that have arisen with the process. If confirmed, this is very high on my radar in terms of assessing the process that's in place for exclusions, the decision making, and with an understanding that the transparency, predictability, due process are all critical to the way we want our government to function.
Right, and speed of decision. And to know when the decision's made, the decision's going to carry over from year to year, and they're not constantly worried about now next year. They just can't plan from there. Critical minerals is another area that you and I have talked about before. We're obviously very exposed in that area to China. China has made it very clear, and recent articles have been out there saying they're targeting using that leverage to cut nations off from actually distributing critical minerals to them. That should make us wake up even more in this process. Part of the challenge that we have is when an American company starts their mining process and finally gets through all the environmental restrictions they have to be able to produce it here, China could cut the price there, cuts off access to capital here and growth here, and so we have a problem. So one of the big issues we have, if we're going to have a clean energy or if we're going to produce steel or any number of other things, we have to produce our own critical minerals or develop new relationships with allies that we can trust that will provide critical minerals. What's your strategy on that?
Senator Langford, I know that the Biden administration issued a supply chains executive order yesterday that specifically calls out critical minerals as one of the supply chains for special focus in crafting a strategy. So if confirmed, I look forward to participating in that process and supporting that review. In terms of the strategy coming from USTR, as you know, because we talked about it in our earlier conversation, one of the big cases that I worked on at USTR related to China's export restrictions on rare earths and a number of other critical materials and minerals that come out of the ground. I think that in this area, trade has an important part to play, but the trade piece is part of a larger strategy that relates to our supply chain resilience. And so I, if confirmed, will look forward to being not just a connector between Congress and the administration, but being well coordinated with the other parts of the administration who are thinking and making plans in this area.
Right. So identifying some of those rare earth and critical minerals that we're exposed on and finding other places to be able to get them so we have multiple sources, and developing those relationships should be part of our strategy. I know you've had some brief comments about this. I won't go into it in depth. The trade relationship with the UK is extremely important to many people in Oklahoma. It's an area I want us to continue to be able to develop. I know that's difficult. They have a problem with chlorinated chicken. We have a problem with E. coli. So apparently they don't have as much of a problem with it as we do. But all those issues can be worked out, should be worked out in the days ahead, and I would encourage you to do that. And as we've talked before, as you're developing multiple different trade relationships, I would encourage you to develop relationship with State Department to be innovative in the area of smaller countries with less economic development, that we can actually partner with state to be able to do some of those things under your guidance and leadership. With that, thank you.
I thank my colleagues. Senator Daines is next. Senator Daines, Casey, and Young are the next three. Senator Daines.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Tai. Good to see you again. My colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Langford, talked about cotton and some of his products. It's a little cold in Montana to grow cotton, but we're excited about beef, wheat, barley, wool products, as well as pulse crops. In Montana, we realize that 95% of the world's population lives outside the United States. So access to these markets is critically important, certainly from some of our ag-focused states. Believe it or not, Montana is the #1 pulse crop producing state. Now, what are pulse crops? You know what those are, but for the benefit of those who don't, it's peas, lentils, chickpeas. We're now #1. Our farmers realize that they put nitrogen naturally back into the ground. Our wheat and barley producers are now rotating more of those crops in. It's been a great success story to diversify our crops and for sustainability. Access to India's pulse crop market is very important for our Montana farmers, for Montana jobs, and for our economy. Unfortunately, as you know, U.S. pulse crops face high tariffs, a very unfair playing field there with India. And that's why last year, Senator Kramer of North Dakota and I sent President Trump a letter urging to prioritize the issue. He took that letter directly to Prime Minister Modi, in fact. The President sent me back a picture as he hand-delivered that letter to Prime Minister Modi during the visit. So my question for you, would you commit to engaging India on this issue and prioritize the removal of those tariffs and other barriers to trade with India as you look at more trade negotiations with India?
Senator Daines, it's nice to see you as well. I know that our interests with India are manifold. I commit to you to having an awareness of the importance of pulse crops trade. And if confirmed, I look forward to engaging with the Indians on our trade relationship, and we'll keep pulse crops in mind.
Thank you. It's very critical we support our pulse crop farmers. If we get a level playing field, we're going to see continued growth and overseas opportunities for us. So thank you for that. Shifting gears to TPP, back in 2018, I led over 24 of my colleagues in sending a letter to President Trump urging him to re-engage with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I'm calling on President Biden to do the same. I know politically that seemed not always be the most attractive issue at that time, but I believe strongly that this multilateral approach with our allies is very important to think about the long term of trade. Given China's growing economic and geopolitical influence, it's essential that we work with our allies and partners in the region. As we had a great conversation, we both spent time living in China, working in Guangzhou. My question for you is, do you support re-engaging with the Trans-Pacific Partnership and pursuing multilateral trade agreements with our friends and allies in APAC and around the world to improve access to important markets and counter China's growing influence?
Senator Daines, again, I know your interest in this area and your experience with respect to China and the Asia Pacific. to follow on the exchange that I had earlier with Senator Carper, I want to emphasize that even today in 2021, the basic formula of TPP, which was to work with our partners with whom we have very important shared interests economically and strategically, and with the challenge of China in mind, is still a sound formula. I think that what I would add is that a lot has changed in the world in the past 5 or 6 years, and a lot has changed in terms of our own awareness about some of the pitfalls of the trade policies that we've pursued as we've pursued them over the most recent years. So what I would say to you today is, with respect to working with other countries on a multilateral basis in the Asia Pacific, with the China challenge in mind, that if confirmed, those are absolutely elements that I believe are worth pursuing.
Thank you. I want to shift gears here. There's so many things to talk about in such a short amount of time, and that's China and polysilicon. For years, the U.S. polysilicon industry has been targeted by China, and retaliatory tariffs are threatening high-wage manufacturing jobs. In fact, one of our facilities, REC Silicon in Butte, Montana. Polysilicon was specifically included in the Phase 1 agreement as well, and China committed to opening its market, but has failed to do so to this point. Could you provide any updates on any developments regarding polysilicon and how China is moving forward with any purchases?
Senator Daines, I am sorry to hear, and I'm upset to hear that from the polysilicon industry that China has not followed through on the promises that it made in that agreement. If confirmed, I want you to know that working on the relationship with China, on the implementation of the China agreement, and to continuing to dynamically work on a vision for where we take the U.S.-China trade relationship is absolutely critical in my mind.
Last quick question is...
and very, very quickly...
I'll go quick. It's about beef. It's a big deal for us in Montana, and I'll be quick on this. If confirmed, would you work closely with USDA to remove these non-tariff barriers relating to beef exports with our trading partners and advocate for science-based and rules-based standards?
Senator Daines, if confirmed, yes.
We have 3 cows per person in Montana, so thank you.
Very, very good. Thank you, colleague. Well, let's see. We have Senator Casey on the web.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much, and I want to thank Ms. Tide for her willingness to continue public service. Just a remarkable personal story, and I want to commend you for the work you've already done, and we're inspired by your story and your commitment. I especially appreciated your reference to, quote, trade policies that advance the interests of all Americans, unquote. I'm putting the emphasis on the word all because all, of course, should include men and women having the opportunity, the equal opportunity to reach their full potential and have the same opportunity to contribute to society. And that should be reflected in our trade policy, where we should affirm values that we all hold dear as Americans. Senator Cortez Masto and I have developed a series of policies to incorporate measures on women's economic empowerment and participation in our trade laws. And I know this is work that you're not only well familiar with, but have helped to advance. If confirmed as USTR, will you work with our efforts to incorporate measures on women's economic empowerment and participation in our trade laws and make this a priority at USTR?
Yes.
Thank you. It's great to have brevity in an answer that incorporates so much. We're not used to that in the Senate. But I also wanted to add to that, as you undertake your work at USTR in furtherance of the President Biden's racial equity executive order, I want to note the intersectional issues of gender and race and hope that they would be incorporated and considered. And I'll assume your answer to that is yes as well. Let me move secondly to China, and I know that's been a focus of your attention and the attention of the members of the committee on so many fronts. We face just a myriad of challenges when it comes to the Chinese government, especially. we've got to engage, I think, in coordinated efforts to address a number of issues. Market distortions is one. Second, subsidies. And third, anti-competitive behavior the Chinese government engages in. Through our trade subcommittee in the Finance Committee in the last Congress, Senator Cornyn and I worked on a range of issues posed by the Chinese government, including the Belt and Road Initiative, extraterritorial censorship, and market access challenges. These, of course, are cross-cutting issues which will require both coordination and cooperation. You have significant, I think that's an understatement, significant experience in this regard. Can you discuss your observations with respect to the evolution of tactics and strategy employed by the Chinese government in the trade and economic space, and how USTR can work in coordination with the interagency to combat some of these efforts to support domestic production and competition?
Senator Casey, I've watched those hearings that you and Senator Cornyn have put on here in the Senate Finance Committee and appreciate the levels of expertise and interest that you have demonstrated with respect to our China trade and competition issues and challenges. Just thinking through how to provide you with a pithy response to your really meaty question. And I think that what I would say is that with respect to the nature of the Chinese challenges, I think it's clear that when we as Americans, with our economic traditions, look at the Chinese economy, what we see is an extremely formidable competitor where the state is able to conduct the economy almost like a conductor with an orchestra, whether or not through companies that are officially state-owned or just companies that are part of the Chinese economy. I think that traditionally we in our system have been very trusting of the free market, of the invisible hand that Adam Smith described in terms of the market forces taking care of our economy and global competition. And I think that what the most recent years has taught us is that we need to revisit how we conduct our economic activity, our cooperation and our trade policies, not to become China, but how to be true to ourselves and our traditions and be more strategic, knowing the quantity and the strategy and ambition that we are up against.
Well, thanks very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank my colleague, Senator Young.
Welcome, Ms. Tsai. It's good to see you again. I enjoyed our visit prior to this committee appearance. I know that a topic of mutual interest for you and me, and I also know the administration, is the issue of supply chain and domestic reshoring. In fact, I look forward to working with the administration and you on that. So much of the pandemic's negative impact can be attributed to this lack of domestic sourcing capacity for a variety of products, PPE, semiconductors, batteries, chemicals, the list goes on and on. Compounding this problem is the fact that our supply chains are nearly solely reliant on manufacturing in China. The President's executive order released yesterday is, I would say, a step in the right direction. But I would caution you and others about timeliness and expediency. I've been in Congress long enough to know that these multi-agency reviews can take a lot longer than we hope for and then sometimes projected. And we have industries that know their own faults right now, but we can't expect them to build a factory overnight. So I just hope that we approach this issue with great humility moving forward and move as quickly as possible nonetheless. You and I have discussed various strategies to support domestic reshoring while ensuring that businesses aren't further harmed during these strenuous times. Aggregated demand mapping is a term that most people are probably unfamiliar with. But it's something I think we may have discussed in our earlier conversation. So that's one area that is of great interest to me, and it pertains to supply chains. And then just more robust federal support for U.S.-based innovation is also something I support. Both of these issues and policy initiatives are embedded in my legislation, the Endless Frontier Act, which would go a long way to both understanding and addressing the problem of supply chain. So, Ms. Tsai, do you believe it's possible to work on understanding and addressing our supply chain problem simultaneously, understanding it and addressing it at the same time?
Senator Young, thank you for that question. I sure hope so, because I think that's exactly what we need to do.
Okay. Well, my sense is that's the administration's objective, because they're, with the executive order attempting to understand it, there's still some lack of clarity as to what resources that have been publicly reported are going to be dedicated towards this issue, what they'll be spent on as we seek to understand. So we need to strike the right balance there. What levers do you anticipate using to promote domestic reshoring?
Senator Young, I think, as I'm just thinking about it, if confirmed, I'm really eager to get in and to have USTR do its part in this process. In terms of reshoring, and I like the term reshoring as opposed to onshoring, because reshoring suggests that we will be doing something here in the United States to rebuild our manufacturing capacity, to reindustrialize, but it also suggests that we will be taking another look at our supply chains and the partnerships that we have with other sources of supply. In terms of USTR's role, I think that there are clearly trade relationships, trusted trade relationships that can be leveraged.
Did Ambassador Lighthizer in the previous administration have adopt the appropriate approach in your view?
I'm not quite sure with respect to supply chains.
With respect to reshoring.
With respect to reshoring, that's an interesting question. I think that I will have to think about it to give you my best answer, but I know that with respect to Ambassador Lighthizer's policies, that there's been a lot of disruption and consternation that have accompanied some of those policies. I'd want to accomplish similar goals in a more effective, process-driven manner.
Let me ask you one more question here. Knowing that intellectual property is really our value added for so much of our economy. In my home state of Indiana, roughly $8 billion in R&D investments occur annually in the state of Indiana. In order to protect jobs and investments here domestically, we have to rein in abuses and focus on international IP law reforms. I know we're still trying to get clarity on President Biden's approach vis-a-vis China on a range of different issues, and he's working to bring clarity on those issues, I think, as well. But it can be assumed that he's not going to tolerate any sign of lapses in China's IP protections or from other foreign countries. Can you elaborate briefly on how you would help to develop President Biden's coherent strategy to ensure that IP-intensive industries are supported through U.S. trade policy?
Yes, let me think through your particular question. So As you may know, Senator Young, President Biden and his administration are committed to undertaking a comprehensive China review, and that will involve IP protections, and it will also go across the board in terms of our strategic interests and our cross-disciplinary policy areas. With respect to the specific issue of the respect for intellectual property rights, I think that that is a particular example of just a flagrantly unfair trade action. And I want to acknowledge that the Section 301 investigation that Ambassador Lighthizer started was based on a very voluminous and a lot of hard work in documenting really examples of that kind of abuse. So the Section 301 investigation is itself one example of IP enforcement and how far you can take it. I think that clearly there ought to be other tools as well. And I would be very interested, if confirmed, to work with you on those tools.
Way over here, and my colleague's talking about something important now. We're going to be calling some audibles here. I would say to the nominee, Ms. Tai. Senator Cortez Masto will ask some questions. I'm going to run over and see if I can get back very quickly, but it's our intention between Senator Crapo and I to keep this going. Senator Cortez Masto, are you there?
I am here. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Senator.
Thank you, colleagues, so much, and you're recognized, and I will run over and be right back, and we thank our nominee for her patience.
Thank you. First of all, let me start off by thanking you and congratulating you, Ms. Tai, on your nomination. I, too, am excited. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. Let me start by asking a few questions here, and then I'll open it up for others as well. This past October, the former administration issued a proclamation that increased tariffs on solar energy to 18% in 2021 from the previously announced level of 15%. The proclamation also authorized a new investigation that could extend these tariffs beyond the 4 years originally levied. At the end of last year, I signed on to a letter with several of my colleagues urging the Biden administration to repeal these tariffs, as they have resulted in nearly 62,000 workers being either laid off or never hired, as well as the loss of 10.5 gigawatts of solar capacity. So my question to you is, if confirmed, what would be your approach to reviewing and addressing this issue?
Senator Cortez Masto, the solar Section 201 safeguard action has been going on for a number of years, and so I am familiar with its origins and some of the developments since then. I think that one of the challenging aspects of a case like this one is that you have petitioners here in the United States who sought the review and won the remedy. And here we are, because it has impacts on different sides of the industry in the United States, where we find ourselves really challenged to figure out how to thread the needle in a situation where an industry is trying to stay afloat in the face of China cornering the market on solar panels. So I want to just start by acknowledging that this is a really tough issue. If confirmed, USTR does have a role to play with respect to the Section 201 process, and I commit to you to engaging in that process in good faith and keeping in good touch with senators like yourself who have a stake in the outcome of this proceeding.
Thank you. And that's really all I could ask right now. Thank you for that commitment. I think that's so helpful. Let me jump to an issue that Senator Casey also talked to you about. As you're aware, legal authorization for the General System of Preference program expired on December 31st in 2020. As a result, U.S. imports entering the United States after that date that were previously eligible for duty-free treatment under GSP are subject to regular, normal trade relation rates of duty. Prior to its expiration, Senator Casey and I introduced the Women's Economic Empowerment Trade Act to ensure countries receiving trade preferences under GSP strengthen standards on workers' rights and the rights of women. So can you discuss your thoughts on GSP, and do you see a need to update a GSP to ensure stronger standards in equity and representation?
Senator Cortez Masto, I know that GSP enjoys bipartisan support up here on the Hill in particular. And if confirmed, I look forward to engaging from USTR on efforts that I know are ongoing here on the Hill to update and to continue the GSP program.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let me talk a little bit about China's Belt and Road. One area I'm proud of Congress's work in response to the China challenge is what we've done to respond to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And although there's more work to be done, we passed bipartisan legislation, which I supported, to establish the Development Finance Corporation. I remain dedicated to ensuring the United States is stepping up to the plate to address the challenges and opportunities posed by competition with China. From your perspective, what measures should Congress be taking, like the Development Finance Corporation, to improve the U.S.'s ability to compete with China?
Well, Senator Cortez Masto, I just want to acknowledge my awareness of the high levels of energy interest and innovative thinking in the Congress about this very question of how the United States can compete more effectively with China. So with respect to the development finance entity that you've described and what else Congress may want to do, I just want to indicate to you that if confirmed, I will be very interested in being part of the administration conversation with Congress about what we do in our whole of government approach to addressing this question.
Ms. Tai, thank you. I know my time is up, but I thank you so much for your willingness to serve, and congratulations again on your nomination. Now, let me go through the list to see who might be next in line to ask questions. Is Senator Warner available? I know many of the senators are on the floor voting right now. Is Senator Warner available? If not, we'll move to Senator Sass. All right, let's try for Senator Whitehouse. All right, I understand Senator Barrasso is available in there. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you very much. I'm in the committee room, and congratulations. Thank you for taking the time to visit with me last week by phone. I enjoyed it very much. Congratulations again. And, you know, as we discussed, one of the issues that's so critically important to my home state of Wyoming is soda ash. And I think you had, in the introduction, talked about your parents coming to the country because of efforts by President John Kennedy. And I think I mentioned to you that when Carolyn Kennedy was nominated to be ambassador to Japan, she came here and we talked about soda ash. And I think since then, every time I see her, she refers to me as Senator Soda Ash. So it's really critically important to our state. It's the United States, our natural soda ash is refined from a mineral called trona. The Green River Basin in Wyoming has the world's largest trona deposit. Soda ash is a key manufacturing component for glass, detergents, soaps, chemicals. U.S. natural soda ash sets the standard for quality, for purity, energy efficiency, and production. And like many U.S. industries, soda ash faces significant trade barriers around the world. So as part of your effort to promote U.S. industries in international markets, will you commit to advocate for eliminating trade barriers for soda ash and other important U.S. industries in the international marketplace?
Senator Barrasso, the short answer is yes. I wanted to let you know that I did a little bit of my own research on soda ash in your state, the trona ore. You mentioned that one of the benefits of producing soda ash from trona ore is that it is more clean, the process that we have here. And in terms of the competition that soda ash producers face, they are facing producers who are working with dirtier processes. I just want to say that, yes, in terms of working through our trade policies in advancing our soda ash producers, but also my interest, if confirmed, in working with the other parts of the government to look at the question more holistically in terms of how we advantage our producers.
Well, I appreciate that very much. I did want to talk about energy. And in 2019, the United States became a net energy exporter for the first time since 1952. U.S. energy independence, I believe, is critically important for our national security. American energy production provides good jobs, funding for the schools and public services, all of these things. So United States liquefied natural gas and other energy exports limit the ability of countries like Russia to wield energy supplies as geopolitical weapons. There's no evidence that a reduction in U.S. fossil fuel production is going to in any way reduce global production or consumption of energy derived from fossil fuels. The need worldwide is going to continue, whether we take it here or whether we just become dependent on then Saudi Arabia, we turn the market over to Russia or other countries. Can you please explain how the U.S. Trade Representative under your leadership is going to support and encourage growing our energy exports and the jobs that are so critical to that this industry provides?
Well, Senator Barrasso, let me acknowledge that energy policy is critical, and I know that in these winter months, it is on the minds of many Americans in terms of our access to energy and having good energy policy. Let me also acknowledge my own limitations in terms of my background in this area. Obviously, we do trade in energy, import and export, but I also know that this is an area where, if confirmed, USTR will need to work closely with other departments of the administration, the Department of Energy, primarily in my mind, in terms of what we do for U.S. policy, and I look forward to doing that.
Could I also ask you about U.S. beef and cattle productions and cattle producers in Wyoming and across the West are responsible stewards of pasture and rangelands. We sequester carbon while producing a premium product on land that is typically not suitable for growing other food products. I don't know if Senator Daines has talked to you about that as well. He and I went to China and took U.S. beef with us to China. As climate environment concerns begin to have a greater role in international trade policies, will you commit to working with the cattle producers to defend our science-based production practices and show the rest of the world how American cattle producers are really part of the solution and not the problem?
If confirmed, Senator Barrasso, it would be my pleasure to work with American cattle ranchers on their solution to the problem and advancing their interests.
And my final question, as I'm running out of time, is how does the U.S. Trade Rep intend to protect U.S. farmers and ranchers overall?
So that's an important question, Senator Barrasso, and it gives me an opportunity to reinforce a point I made earlier, which is in thinking about crafting a worker-centered trade policy that very much has in mind agricultural workers and the need to break out of the pattern of pitting one sector of our workers against another sector.
Well, thank you and congratulations again on your nomination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.
I think, Ms. Tai, I'm up next and chairing for the moment as well. So thank you very much for being here. I wish you every success. I am delighted that you raised climate at the front of your priorities list. That may have been alphabetical, but I hope it actually was not. We, I believe, in Congress live in a fairyland of folly about how serious this problem is that is brought on primarily by the fact that we live in a world in which fossil fuel influence has more clout than fact. So I'm delighted to see that. I'm also delighted that your introducers described you as somebody who would be all about enforcement, enforcement, and enforcement. I hope that's true. I've been in Congress 14 years, and enforcement has never been an adequate priority in my view, ever. So I hope when you're done improving enforcement, you then improve enforcement, and then you improve enforcement again. Two topics I'd like to touch with you on. First is the ISDS issue. In my view, when big American industries deploy legions of lawyers to intimidate small countries, like the way the tobacco industry went after little Togo on the African coast, when they're trying to protect their people, these countries, from the dangers of the products of those big lawyer-laden industries, that may be good for the industry, but that's also the face of America.
And it's a lasting face of America for the people in the country who were bullied through this process. And it's not the face of America that I think we want to see. We are a country that lives in many respects by virtue of the power of our example and of our principles and of our values. And the face that we present to particularly smaller countries, I think, is vitally important. So I urge you to think of that in the way in which we handle all these ISDS supports. The tobacco industry has revenues far greater than that of the government of Little Togo. And going after them the way they did was, to me, disgraceful and damaged us with not only the Togolese, but also many other countries that witnessed that phenomenon. That has to stop. That is not the way America should present itself to the world. It has foreign policy and national security consequences when we let that run wild. So I hope that you'll take that to heart as we look at the ISDS problem. Is that a fair comment in your view?
Senator Whitehouse, you've made clear your views and critiques of ISDS. On this, I would just acknowledge and recognize that President Biden himself has articulated his opposition to ISDS on the basis of the chilling effects that it has on other countries' policymaking. And I think that the other data point that I would share is Ambassador Lighthizer himself also had real objections to ISDS. So
yeah, there were surprising improvements in the USMCA that I was actually surprised and pleased by. Last topic for me is that our oceans are being trashed right now. There's bipartisan support here to fix that. We've done a lot of work on measures that have passed by unanimous consent. We've set up new funding. We've given USAID new programs. There's been a lot of work, and there's more coming. But even with the stated support for cleaning up the plastic trash in the oceans from the previous president, from his Secretary of State, and from Ambassador Lighthizer, when he actually got to the negotiation to try to do something about the plastics problem, every time there was a conference on this subject, what came out of it in the press was that the United States had been the obstacle. The United States had been the laggard. The United States had been the spoiler. And I don't know what happened between President Trump and Secretary Pompeo and Trade Representative Lighthizer and those negotiating teams that caused those negotiating teams to feel comfortable being the worst player in the room trying to solve this problem. But that really has to stop, in my view. And this is not an issue in which big business, in your position, big business is going to be pressuring you like almost nobody else in government. They want their stuff through trade, and as you know, you'll be living at the center point of enormous pressing corporate forces. None of them are going to be pressing to clean up our oceans. That's going to have to be on you and on your team to make sure that that stays at the front of the agenda. Are you ready to do that?
Senator Whitehouse, I know your interest and passion on this particular issue, and I was really well educated in our first conversation by you on congressional efforts and the fact that they are bipartisan on this issue. I want to acknowledge that the USMCA environmental chapter has language that addresses marine debris and the ocean plastics problem, and that in the renegotiation between the Democrats and the Trump administration, there is additional appropriations that were made available to support the U.S. government efforts. So let me just say that this is very much on my mind, in particular because it is so important to you. And I think that there is an important and positive role for USTR to play, and if confirmed, I will follow up on this.
Good. So will I. And I turn over now to the redoubtable Senator Hassan of New Hampshire.
Well, thank you, Senator Whitehouse, and consider this New England neighbor another saltwater senator who cares a great deal about marine debris, as do members of both parties, as you've heard. And I want to thank Chairman Wyden and Ranking Member Crapo for holding what is truly an important hearing today. And thank you, Ms. Tai, for not only appearing here, but for your willingness to serve our country during this difficult time. And thank you to your family as well. I want to follow up on a discussion that I know you've already had with some of the other committee members I was encouraged by the bipartisan discussion that I joined at the White House yesterday on securing and strengthening U.S. supply chains. We have to take on the Chinese government and reinvest in American manufacturing in order to protect our national security, our public health, and our economic independence. The President's executive order yesterday is a necessary first step to rebuilding our domestic supply chains for strategically critical technology and the supplies we need to address COVID-19, for example. I know others asked you some questions about this, so could you, following up on those previous questions, expand on the importance of building resilience in securing domestic supply chains? And can you give the committee a sense of the USTR's role in implementing the President's review of strategically critical U.S. industries?
Senator Hassan, I'd be pleased to. I think that I may have mentioned earlier, but the COVID-19 pandemic in particular provided those of us working on trade policy with a lot of food for thought about the supply chain disruptions and how we could find ourselves in such a vulnerable position scrambling for goods that the rest of the world needed all at the same time. I think that's led to some very reflective and positive bipartisan conversations around not just the supply chain strategy itself, but also its implications for how we adjust the assumptions that we build into our trade policies and what we try to accomplish with our trade policies. On your second question of USTR's role in the administration's effort that was rolled out yesterday, if confirmed, I really look forward to bringing USTR and all of its talents and insights to bear on the interagency process and in the conversation with Congress to craft the best and most strategic policies that we can to put the U.S. on the strongest footing we can.
Thank you. Now I want to talk about another issue. Ms. Tai, exports of manufactured products support 18,000 jobs in my state. New Hampshire's largest manufacturing export category is computer and electronics products, which make up about 1/4 of our exports, actually a little bit over 1/4 of our exports. How will you work at USTR to support U.S. manufacturing jobs and strengthen U.S. exports in the computer and electronics industry?
Well, Senator Hassan, if confirmed and at USTR, I would be delighted to work with you and your state and your stakeholders on supporting their productivity and their access to export markets.
Well, thank you. It's something I'd look forward to working on with you as well. I spoke with President Biden about this issue yesterday when we were at the White House. And it includes the critical need to invest in domestic production of semiconductors, which I know other people have talked to you about. We don't want to cede that to China either. And I look forward to working with you on that. One other issue, if I could, the bipartisan U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement cut red tape for small exporters by expanding electronic filing of customs forms and making more exports into Mexico and Canada tariff-free. The small business chapter of the USMCA also created a committee dedicated to giving a voice to small businesses and shaping trade policy. Will you work at USTR to ensure that small businesses are represented on this committee and to ensure that the views of the committee are reflected in our efforts to support innovative U.S. businesses who are competing in the global economy?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank my colleague, and I think we've had a number of senators pitching in the collegial Finance Committee fashion, and I thank them all. I think now we have on the web first Senator Warren and then Senator Toomey, and we may have a couple of others, and I thank our nominee for our patience. We are going to, I think, finish before the time that it took with your colleague, Mr. Becerra, and that will be good. Okay, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Trade agreements have a tremendous impact on our economy. They touch everything that people have been talking about this morning, from jobs and wages to the quality of the air we breathe. Ms. Tai, I want to talk about process. Rigged processes produce rigged outcomes. And I worry that the processes that structure our trade policy are stacking the deck against American families. One big piece of this is who is actually writing our trade deals. When the people who are whispering in the ears of our trade negotiators are corporate executives and industry lobbyists, you can bet that the outcome is probably not going to be great for American workers and American families. And that is exactly what happened with TPP. About 85% of the people sitting in on our trade advisory committees when that deal was negotiated were representatives from corporations and industry. And by the way, it took months to even uncover this information. It wasn't even publicly listed. So, Ms. Tai, do I have your commitment that each of our existing trade advisory committees will have more representatives from labor, consumer, and environmental groups than from corporations?
Senator Warren, thank you for your question. I know how important this is to you, and I wanted to share with you as well that I am a firm believer that good process drives good substance. In terms of the composition of the advisory committees, I commit to you to reviewing how those advisory committees are composed. There is a statute that governs in this area, and I will be very eager, if confirmed, to come back to you to look at that statute and to look at how the composition of those advisory committees actually happens.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you're going to come back to me on this, but I have to say that if the administration won't ensure that the interests of American workers and American families are prioritized over corporations when we're writing trade deals, then we're never going to get beyond a trade policy that leaves American families on the losing side. This needs to happen. So I'm looking forward to following up on this. I want to ask you about another important piece of process, and that's about what the public is allowed to see before trade deals are enacted. After corporate executives and lobbyists are done shaping the terms of an agreement, Congress is usually asked to fast track it, greasing the skids so that that agreement can pass with a simple up or down vote, no ability to make changes on it. But the public doesn't actually know what their representatives are fast tracking because they never got to see the agreement. It's kept secret. So workers and families have no idea how corporations may have thrown them under the bus until after Congress has already tied its hands and given up some of its ability to fix the agreement. So, Ms. Tai, I believe that Americans should be able to see for themselves whether or not trade deals that are being negotiated are actually good deals for them and for their families. Can you commit to releasing the draft bracketed text of any trade agreement under negotiation at least 2 months before Congress is asked to fast track it? Give us a chance to read it.
Senator Warren, I want to make clear to you how important the principles that you are articulating here with respect to those that advise our trade negotiators and with respect to making the results of trade negotiations available to the public. So I want to start from there. I maybe want to go a step further and to let you know that this interest in transparency and connecting with the American people directly on our trade policies, in my mind, goes beyond what we do in the context of negotiating large trade agreements, that I very much hope, if confirmed, to bring these principles to the conduct of U.S. trade policy on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I very much appreciate that you want to engage with the American people on this, but what I'm really looking for here is a hard commitment. To me, this is another place where the administration needs to take a hard line. Trade negotiations must be open and transparent to the public. And without that commitment, you're denying Americans the ability to know if what is being negotiated on their behalf actually benefits them. Because they don't get any real input into the process. Look, trade agreements need to happen on terms that strengthen American workers and the American economy. And if we want American families to come out ahead on trade deals, we need to start by fixing the processes that have produced these rigged outcomes. We need to make sure that representatives from labor and consumer and environmental groups, not just from corporations, are the ones who are filling the seats at the table. And we need to give the public an opportunity to actually see and evaluate the trade agreements that will have such a huge impact on their lives and on their communities. This would be a really big step toward making our trade policy work better for America. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is my colleague from Massachusetts finished? Okay.
Yes.
Next will be Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tye, thank you for your willingness to serve our nation. As you may know, I worked closely with your predecessor on the issue of seasonality. I consistently hear from my growers in South Carolina and agriculture producers back home from about the unfair trade practices and disadvantages they continue to face as they compete with foreign food producers. Our current policies, frankly, or the lack thereof, force my producers to compete against subsidized foreign growers with one hand tied behind their back, while continuing to grapple with the pandemic at the exact same time. Given your experience negotiating USMCA and understanding that seasonality was included as a TPA negotiating priority, if confirmed, will you commit to working with me on this issue and keeping me updated on the steps taken to make sure that we address the unfair trade practices that put American farmers last?
Senator Scott, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. As we work to recover from the recession the pandemic caused, we must continue to put America's workers, the small businesses that employ them, and all job creators first. President Biden, a longtime ally of labor leaders, has been vocal about his plan to pursue a worker-centric trade policy agenda. Today, roughly 10.8% of all wage and salary workers in this country are members of unions. It's their right, including thousands of South Carolina's employees. What can we expect this worker-centric trade policy agenda to encompass? And if confirmed, can you assure me that the roughly 90% of American workers and 98% of South Carolina's workers who are not union members will also stand to benefit from the agenda?
Thank you for this important question and opportunity to elaborate on the spirit of a worker-centered trade policy, Senator Scott. I want to assure you, as I have done earlier with some of your colleagues on the committee, that worker-centered trade policy, the term worker, really is expansive and covers our workers in all different segments of our economy, industries, and workers who are unionized and workers who are not unionized. If you are an American and you work, you are an American worker, as I envision the way we're talking about this. The other element I would like to highlight for you is that in talking about a worker-centered trade policy, it really is a signal that the patterns that we have had in our earlier trade policies, where regular Americans, regular workers may have felt that their livelihoods were being traded away for other interests in our trade policies, that is something, that is a pattern that we are trying to break out of.
Well, Ms. Tye, I'll just say that there's no doubt in my mind that folks back in South Carolina in my textile industry and throughout the state that saw their jobs and their companies just shuttered or destroyed during previous trade negotiations welcome that definition of a worker-centric approach. So thank you very much. A critical part of South Carolina's economy is the advanced manufacturing and automotive sectors. These industries significantly contribute to our growth, workforce development, and frankly, the exporting power of the state. Roughly 1 in 10 jobs in South Carolina are supported by manufacturing. International automakers alone generated nearly 80,000 jobs in the state before the pandemic. This is why I believe it's so important that we work to reduce trade barriers and unleash the full potential of our nation's exporting capabilities. Key to this is ensuring the speedy and proper implementation of the USMCA. If confirmed, will you commit to consulting with those in the manufacturing, automotive, and agricultural sectors to ensure any obstacles that arise during USMCA implementation are addressed?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. I believe we're waiting for Senator Warner.
Mr. Chairman, I'm here.
Why don't you go ahead, Senator Warner?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tye, thank you for being with us today and appreciate your willingness to serve. I want to go back to some questions around China, and I think I've tried over the last few years to always make the point that I talk about China. My beef is with the Communist Party of China and President Xi Jinping, and it's not with the Chinese people, and I think that message needs to be always reflected. One of the areas that I've been very active on the last couple of years is how we deal with the question of Huawei. And I think finally we've come to some policy that has been able to keep Huawei out of the American market. But the truth is, protecting a secure digital infrastructure has never been a priority in our trade negotiations, because if we simply keep Huawei out of American domestic markets, but Huawei gets the rest of the world, we're not going to be successful. So I think we should have been aware of this earlier. Digital security of our infrastructure ought to be in part of our trade organization. So will you support including the promotion of secure and trusted digital infrastructure, including potential prohibitions on reliance on untrusted vendors in any future TPA efforts? And I've got a bill on this actually with Senator Thune, so I want to make sure I give Senator Thune appropriate credit as well.
Senator Warner, thank you. And I'm aware of the legislation that you and Senator Thune have worked on before. I think that the issue of our critical infrastructure and its reliability and the degree to which we can trust it is of the highest level of importance. And with respect to being informed by this issue and these types of issues in our trade policy, what I would share with you is, if confirmed, my inclination to take this beyond just the informing of objectives for, a trade agreement negotiation, to say that this is something that I think that the U.S. government, the administration, and the Congress should be laser focused on across the board.
Thank you. One of the things I think, and I've seen this more from my role on the Intelligence Committee, where the chairman serves with me, is that for a long time in this country, we kind of presumed that virtually every major innovation would take place in America. If it didn't take place in America, we'd be able to set the rules, protocols, and standards. I think 5G is the first place where, again, we've seen China start to take that increasingly important role. I fear that we could see a duplication of that in artificial intelligence, and facial recognition, and quantum computing, a host of other areas. And while, again, a little, not directly USTR's responsibility, but my fear is what I call the authoritarian capitalism model, where China allows a national champion to emerge that dominates 75, 80% of the Chinese market, translates into 20 to 25% of the global market, and then they get virtually unlimited Chinese support, government support to expand. That's a business model where any American, or for that matter, any Western company, will be at a disadvantage. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your views around multilateralism and the fact that I really think around technology development, we're going to need a coalition of the willing that includes not simply our Five Eyes and NATO's, but the Japans and South Koreas and Taiwans and Singapore's, potentially India's and Israel's. But how do we think about this broad-based technology competition, in particular with China?
Senator Warner, I think you are also asking questions that get to the heart of the vision that we need to have for the role that the United States plays in the future of our world, in our global relationships. The technology race implicates fundamental aspects of our political and economic values. And also implicates this notion of trust that we have in the providers and the designers of a technology development that is touching all of our lives so directly and so comprehensively. So in terms of the elements that you have just mentioned, multilateralism, working with others, really thinking strategically ahead about how we work through challenges and opportunities with respect to our technology, our trade and economic policies, and our strategic relationships. I, if confirmed, look forward to engaging in these issues in depth with yourself and with your colleagues.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say there are I think your point that there are values that are actually reflected sometimes in technology standards is a point that sometimes is overlooked. So I really look forward to supporting you and working with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank my colleague and Ms. Tai. I think that, excuse me, Senator Toomey awaits on the web.
Thank
Senator
you,
Toomey,
Chairman.
I didn't mean to intentionally pass over you.
Oh, I'm sure you wouldn't do that. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Tide, thank you, and thanks for your
Senator Toomey, now you are coming in a little bit faint. If you can be a little louder.
Okay.
Perfect.
Am I coming through?
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Tide, thank you for your endurance here. I'm hoping I'm last for your sake. I want to go back to some process issues here. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution explicitly gives Congress the responsibility to, quote, lay and collect taxes and duties, end quote, and also to, quote, regulate commerce with foreign nations. That the regulation of trade is a power of Congress. Now, as we know, as a condition of Congress's delegation of some of our constitutional trade powers to the executive branch, Congress has specified certain consultation and reporting requirements to ensure that the executive branch is pursuing a path that Congress supports. In my view, the previous administration did not always follow all of these requirements. So can you commit to us that you will follow and adhere to all of the consultation, disclosure, and timeline requirements under TPA if we are pursuing a trade agreement under TPA?
Senator Toomey, thank you. Article 1, Section 8 is seared into my awareness from my 7 years working on the Hill. I want to reinforce your description of the relationship and the partnership that's required between the administration and Congress on trade as a constitutional and legal matter, and just add that the creation of the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and this particular position of U.S. Trade Representative is a creation of Congress. This function was taken out of its traditional place inside the State Department, put inside the Executive Office of the President, and made responsive to Congress. So I would be willing to do you one better and say, separate from the specific statutory expression of the deal that struck through TPA, that you have my commitment that the good process that leads to good substance starts with a good process and relationship between the U.S. Trade Representative and the Congress.
Right. So you will adhere to the consultation, disclosure, and timeline requirements?
Yes.
Okay. As you may recall, the previous administration also failed to comply with one of the long-standing norms that, although it is not explicitly required in the statute, a mock markup has been the process by which the Senate Finance Committee has expressed its views about the implementing legislation. There was no mock markup for USMCA. So my question is, again, if we are pursuing a trade agreement pursuant to TPA and this committee requests your presence for a mock markup, will you make yourself available and cooperate with us so that we can use that traditional mechanism for communicating our concerns and interests?
Senator Toomey, the letter and the spirit of the law are important to me as a matter of rule of law and good governance in the U.S. government, and so my answer to you is yes.
Great, thank you. As you know, the previous administration also repeatedly threatened to unilaterally withdraw the U.S. from NAFTA prior to the completion and adoption of USMCA. The Senate Finance Committee added report language to the USMCA legislation that says, and I quote, "The United States cannot withdraw from a congressionally approved trade agreement without the consent of Congress," end quote. So do you agree with this committee's position that as a legal matter, a president cannot unilaterally withdraw from a congressionally passed trade deal without Congress's consent?
Senator Toomey, because you're speaking to me and I have a law degree and also 2 bar licenses, I got to confess to you that I haven't myself studied the legal question to the point where I can say that to you definitively. But let me say to you what I can as of today, which is, again, my conviction that the best U.S. trade policy is trade policy that has strong, robust bipartisan support and is crafted through the partnership of the administration and Congress.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the trade agreements that we might pursue under the Biden administration. And I'd just like to get a sense of your how you think about trade agreements. So specifically, if we're engaged, if we have a trade agreement with a modern, developed economy, in an ideal world, in your ideal world, would the goal of that trade agreement be to end up with a mutual and reciprocal zero tariff, zero quota, zero obstacle to trade arrangement with respect to goods and services between our country and that modern developed economy?
Senator Toomey, that's a great question and really intellectually stimulating one, because I know you're serving up to me a certain set of facts that are very clean. But I have to confess to you, my dilemma is that maybe if you'd asked me this question 5 or 10 years ago, I would have been inclined to say yes. But sitting here before you today in 2021, having gone through 4 years of Trump administration trade policies, the previous years of efforts to negotiate the TPP, and the last year of living in a pandemic world, that I think that our trade policies need to be nuanced and need to take into account all of the lessons that we have learned, many of them very painful, from our most recent history. And so while I acknowledge this may be frustrating to you, I think that the most intellectually honest answer I can give to you right now is I'm not sure, and I think it would really depend on the specific facts, the specific partner, and the kinds of consultations that we have with senators like yourself and your constituents and our stakeholders.
Well, I have more than run out of time, but I do have to say I am very disappointed with that answer. I thought within the caveats that I laid out, the answer should be pretty clear. But that does give me some concern about what your goals would be in a negotiation. But I see I'm over my limit, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence.
I thank our colleague. Ms. Tai, been a long morning now, seeping into the afternoon, and thank you for your patience and your families. I just want to highlight a couple of points. I appreciated your picking up on that point I made when we were having discussions with respect to trade really being about expanding the winner's circle. Because for so much of this debate, and I'm going to talk a little about transparency too, people, I believe, just feel in the dark and sort of almost feel out of control. You know, the world has shrunk as a result of modern communications and modern transportation. And people hear all about these trade agreements and say, I don't know, I got to know more about what this means. And that's part of the transparency debate. And it seems to me that what we've been discussing, this idea that on your watch, under President Biden's leadership, we'd expand the winner's circle, kind of makes the point of really trade done right. Because if you can grow it at home and make it at home and add value to it at home, which so often helps to boost wages, which is hugely important in America, then you expand the winner's circle. And that's what Senator Crapo and I are going to be doing in terms of leading this committee on the semiconductor issue. We have it in our states, and we have these companies that pay good wages, high skill jobs. And I have companies that arguably are pure technology companies who are ideally positioned, if government policies make sense, to capture even a greater space, particularly in what I call expanding the winner's circle. Now, on the transparency issue, I want to give you a little bit of an insight into where we've been without chewing up a lot of time, because I think this is so important. You heard members of both sides of the committee talk about how we need more transparency. So I've made this a calling card in my time in public service. I've had 970 open to everybody town hall meetings. No speeches, just come in, people ask anything you want. And for years in the discussion of trade, people would say, Ron, I don't know anything about this. I've been reading and I can't figure out kind of what this is all about. And finally, there was a change to make sure that a trade agreement has to be at least public for 60 days before it's signed by the president. But I think so much more needs to be done to open this process up. And what I'd like to ask of you, and I realize that we haven't gotten into it, could you and your people, and I say this when you're confirmed, because I believe you will be confirmed, within, say, 30 days of your taking office, when I believe you're confirmed, could you get to the bipartisan leadership? We'll share it with members, your ideas for the next steps on transformation, on a transparency.
I would be happy to.
Very, very good. And finally, I just want to end where we talk a little bit about you. You have been there and you have done it all on this trade issue. I mean, rarely do we get somebody who is so experienced and savvy on the challenges. And you know you're going to have heavy lifting. You could spend your entire time just on China and do nothing else because it is such a consequential relationship. Probably the only thing we haven't touched on with respect to China, and Senator Crapo and I have talked about it, is the Chinese really regard economic security and national security as two sides of the same coin. So we've got some heavy lifting to do here. I think you're uniquely qualified. And I've enjoyed my time in public service. But I think one of the most enjoyable moments to come will be to go out on the floor of the United States Senate after you get a resounding vote of approval in this committee with Senator Crapo, and we can, in effect, present your nomination to the whole Senate. And I look forward to that day very much. And I so appreciate the sweat equity that you put in to making it possible for your family to be here. And our special bond is first-generation immigrants. Let me give the last word to my friend, Senator Crapo.
Well, thank you, Senator White, and I'll be brief. I again want to also thank you, Ms. Tai, for your willingness to serve and spending your time here with us today to discuss your nomination. I think that you have proven out what I suggested in my opening statement, that you have the training, the background, the experience, and the capabilities to do this job and to do it well. We all look forward to working with you to make sure that the priorities that we have and that you've shown that you share are achieved, and that we not only show that trade is a bipartisan issue in Congress, but it's one where we can build a very strong, unified approach with the administration and move forward to significantly expand the opportunities for the American worker and American businesses in this country. Thank you very much.
One little bit of procedural work to do, and we will wrap up. Regarding questions for the record, the deadline for members of the committee to submit these questions will be tomorrow, Friday, February 26th at 5 p.m. That 5 p.m. deadline is firm, and we want to thank everyone for their cooperation this morning, and particularly thank our nominee. And with that, the Finance Committee is adjourned.